I'm Jennifer Gordon, and I'm the director of the Atlantic Council's Nuclear Energy Policy Initiative. And it is so wonderful to be back in beautiful Wyoming, here with our hosts at the Cloud Veil. And it's wonderful also to see so many now familiar faces in the audience and to meet a few new folks as well. So thank you all so much for being here. Today's event is really intended as an update on all of the incredible progress that's been made since last year when we last convened the Frontiers Project meeting in Wyoming in October of last year. And for that update and for more details, I am delighted to invite Rob Krieger to the stage, who is Executive Director of the Wyoming Energy Authority.
Well, good morning, and thank you, Jennifer, and the Atlantic Council, as well as the Idaho National Labs for putting this together and getting everyone together. I think this is a great opportunity for us to talk about really where Wyoming's going and where we're leading on the nuclear front. Before that, I just wanted to say a few words about the Wyoming Energy Authority and who we are. We advocate for, facilitate, and advance Wyoming's energy economy. And how we do that is through an all-the-above energy strategy. And I was thinking last night, yesterday Marcio and I were touring the largest coal mine in the world up in Gillette, Wyoming, and now we're here today talking about nuclear. And those are just a couple of the resources we have in Wyoming. We're blessed to have multiple resources below our feet as well as above, and we're looking at advancing every single one of those. To that point, I'm sure you all saw in the news a project we've entered with BWXT. It's gotten a lot of press, and one of the shares from the NEI was, is it, something up to the point of, is it just us, or is Wyoming becoming the hub for advanced nuclear technology? And I spoke with our comms team, and I was like, well, this is perfect, because no, it's not just them, and no, it's not just nuclear. We are doing advanced technology and advancing energy forms on carbon capture, on enhanced oil recovery, on nuclear, you name it. Wyoming is pragmatic in our solutions for energy because, again, that is our #1 industry, and it's what we want to move forward. Before I go too far, I want to kind of compare how the Energy Authority has started and where we are today, and how that kind of is where our energy systems are going as well. I know my predecessor is here, Glenn Morrell. When he started, it was really merging the Pipeline Authority, the Infrastructure Authority, and the State Energy Office into one. And as Glenn knows, I think right when it was official, COVID hit, so there was a little bit of an uproar and some different things that happened. And during that time, as you all know, there was plenty of stimulus packages that went through. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act ended up going through, and that then created this momentum behind new energy systems, hydrogen, nuclear. And Wyoming really decided, okay, how are we going to position ourselves to go after these as well? So with that, at the time I was in the governor's office working with Mr. McKay, who will be up here later, and I have to give kudos to our legislature for their forward thinking on these funds. A lot of money from the federal government, but also required matching. And at the time during our legislative session, we didn't know a ton about the rules around the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act and before the IRA. And we went to Representative Burkhart and Senator Dockstetter and others and said, hey, this is going to be big. We need to be prepared as Wyoming, so what can we do now? And kind of a leap of faith. And to their credit, they set aside not just a little bit of money for us to be ready to go, but a lot of money. And part of that was the Energy Matching Fund that we manage at the WEA on behalf of the governor. And it's over $150 million. And that is where some of these projects are starting to move, and in conjunction with private investment and federal investment. And that's really setting us apart from other states. When I was in the governor's office leading the infrastructure bill as a whole, I would go to DC every quarter. We'd have meetings at the White House to update the White House on what we were doing on the IIJA. And I remember it was almost the first full year that folks would say, yeah, we're trying to get ready for this, and we don't know what to do here, and our legislature's looking at this. We're already done. We already had this money appropriated. We already had this ready to roll, and we were well positioned, better than other states, and I think you're seeing that come to fruition as we do these projects. I know today's about nuclear, and I know Marcio from my team will go in more depth later, but I think the TerraPower project really started to set the stage for Wyoming again. And one thing I didn't realize until somewhat recently is it's not the first nuclear project in Wyoming. We actually had a reactor back in the 60s in Sundance, Wyoming. that this is restarting that and hopefully making Wyoming the frontier for new nuclear technology as well. Then came the BWXT proposal, and these are microreactors, much smaller. How can we deploy these in Wyoming and not just use the energy, but manufacture and use the whole fuel cycle here in the state of Wyoming, which is what we're working on with Mike Wandler and LNH and other folks. One of the first users we've identified is our trona patch. Wyoming is blessed again with having a ton of trona underneath our feet, but they're competing with China. China has a synthetic trona that they sell at much cheaper prices. So if we can keep our trona patches power costs low and their emission standards that they've set as a company, that's right where this microreactor project fit in. So we're excited to see that moving forward. This is going to have more benefits, though, than just our end users. Wyoming is blessed to have the largest uranium reserves in the country. Part of that, to put that in comparison, if you think of 1 pound of uranium, that's about equal to 20,000 pounds of coal. So we have an abundant amount of resources to generate power, and we're hoping that these projects will further that industry and bring it back like it was back in the 80s. So what's next? The WEA, we're kind of weird for state government. We're quasi. I answer to a board that the governor appoints. I serve in his cabinet, but I also, we kind of operate off the grid, which means we can move quickly and be nimble. Part of that, though, is partnering with the private sector. And really, when we look at that, you always hear public-private partnerships, and we talk about this on our team a lot. It should be private-public partnerships. What can we as the public and the government do just to enable these folks? So when they want to move here, when they want to do things here, it's easier. There's not red tape. There maybe are some financing options, those things. So this panel this morning I'm really excited to hear about because we have the private sector leaders as well. The last piece and the key piece as well is community engagement. I think this TerraPower project, and Senator Dockstader can speak about this better than I can, but when it first came about, I think there were some questions. I think there still are some questions from that community. It's a coal community. Things were changing. Nobody likes change, right? That happens. But the more folks were educated on this project and what it can mean for Kemmer and what it can mean for that area of the state, folks started to get on board. Okay, this is where things are moving. These are good paying jobs. This is going to be around for a very long time. And I think that's what's exciting about this community panel as well. I know we have the mayor of Gillette here to talk, Gillette is coal country, biggest in the world. They're going to see some changes, but they're embracing things like nuclear. They're embracing things like other forms of energy to make sure they stay ahead of other states. So I'll leave it at that. I'm excited to hear the conversations this morning and get to know you all, those of you I haven't met. But I appreciate the time, and Jennifer, I'll turn that back to you.
Rob, thank you so much for such an excellent overview and really framing, I think, everything else that we're going to be talking about throughout the course of today. I'm delighted now to invite to the stage to moderate the panel Marcio Paez-Barreto, Director of Industrial Development at the Wyoming Energy Authority. And if the panelists for the first panel could also join us, Josh Grobow, board member at Jackson Hole. Come on up, don't be shy. Board member at Jackson Hole Global Technology Partnership, Maria Jenks, Assistant Lecturer of Management and Marketing at the University of Wyoming College of Business, Joe Miller, President of BWXT Advanced Technologies, and Mike Wandler, President of LNH Industrial. Please come on up to the stage. Marcio, please come up to the stage. And Marcio, I'm delighted now to turn it over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I prepare a couple of slides to complement what Rob just mentioned to you in his opening. So I will try to not kill you with PowerPoint, but I think it's important to anchor this phase of the nuclear energy conversation, this focus in nuclear energy with a couple things. So last year when we hosted the Frontiers in Jackson, we are in the end of this process of gathering inputs, information, community engagement, industry engagement. And that engagement led for us to create a strategic framework for the state of Wyoming, where that strategic framework resulting from this outreach and then reflection help us to identify is opportunities in different segments of the nuclear energy economy. So frontiers is a lot about what can we do to leverage nuclear energy technologies as a driver for low emission and high value industry development. However, our strategic framework has all the elements. How will Wyoming build the supply chain around nuclear energy? Not by trying to grab every single opportunity there, but what are the target opportunities in a nuclear supply chain to include fuel, services, manufacturing of parts, and et cetera. That's what we call the broader energy economy. And last but not least, how can we continue to support the investments that Terra Power and Pacifico are doing to successfully demonstrate the nature? But also, there is a very diverse landscape in terms of utilities in Wyoming. How do we support these other smaller, sometimes rural-based utilities to leverage this technology? And again, just like Rob mentioned, this is part of more comprehensive all of above. One of my biggest feedbacks when I'm asked about the federal programs, they have one specifically that's called coal to nuclear. My feedback is not coal to nuclear, it's coal and nuclear, coal and wind, coal and fill the blank. So again, this strategic framework is part of a larger, broader energy strategy. So what we're going to talk here mostly of the day today in both panels are related to this pillar of our framework, industrial applications. Which industries? This is a map of high intensive industries, energy intensive industries in the United States. You can see we have a few of those in Wyoming, but there are also markets outside Wyoming for these advanced technologies. So the question is, how do we export nuclear energy? And that might be not just by exporting uranium, it could be by exporting the other things that we are targeting in our strategic framework. There is a huge potential to grow in these segments. Here are a breakdown of some of these energy-intensive industries. What is the current capacity they have in cogeneration? Here is exemplified by combined heat and power. And what is the potential to growth in those segments? For those that don't know a lot about industrial applications of heat and power or cogeneration or combined heat and power, it's a very basic. You have your own generation, and then you try to harvest as much of the heat. So you can think about heating machines. You can harvest this heat, and then use the heat also to generate electricity inside. And why cogeneration works? Well, here's a couple lists of benefits for the private sector, for the industry, for the manufacturing, for the chemical processing facilities, for the mining industry. Reducing energy operation costs, increase energy efficiency, and reduce emissions. There are other benefits for such approach too. There are more collective benefits. We can enhance energy infrastructure by incremental building infrastructure and improve energy security and resiliency. And in the end, the hope is how can we grow the U.S. economy as a broader aspect. I'm not going to go over the other elements of the strategic framework. We are going to focus right now in the value chain, but as a quick reminder for everyone, the BWXT project also addresses items in the value chain and in the supply chain. How can we build some of those things in Wyoming? We can stop the slides right now. I'm just going to sit with the other folks here, and then we'll have a good conversation. And I strongly recommend that some of you can come to the front. We don't bite most of the time. And we hope with this smaller audience that we can have a very good conversation. Thank you. So I call everyone here by first name, Joe, Mike, Josh, and Maria. I will let them introduce themselves with a question. Can you please share a little bit who you are, what you're working on, and what kind of problems you're trying to solve? Yeah.
Excellent. So Joe Miller, I'm the president of BWXT's Advanced Technologies Group. We have 3 focus areas. The first is Project Pele. So that's delivering the first advanced microreactor to Idaho National Lab, demonstrating that microreactor. The second would be a space technology called Project Draco. It is a high temperature gas reactor that runs at extreme temperatures to allow the U.S. to traverse the cislunar volume at rapid pace. And then the third, and what we'll be talking about more here today, is our project in Wyoming. So translating the supply chain and the technology from Pele into a commercial variant of that is very important for us. So we've been running under a DOE project. Fort Banner as a risk reduction award. So developing technology that could be directly portable into the commercial industry has been very important for us. So signing this recent contract to hyper-focus on what's needed in Wyoming for the use case and also for the supply chain is really interesting for us. And we saw this market materializing like in 2030, a couple of years ago, and that's no longer true, which is a huge advantage for us in BWXT and a huge advantage for Wyoming. So really excited to be here and talk more about that project, talk more about what our approach is going to be, and just listening more from the other panelists and all of you here in the crowd.
Thank you, Joe. Mike?
Yeah, I'm Mike Wandler. I'm the president and the owner of L&H Industrial Inc. out of Gillette, Wyoming. L&H designs, manufactures, and maintains the biggest machines on Earth. So we're machining, mechanicking, welding, engineering. I got interested in energy and nuclear energy specifically about 4 years ago, and thank goodness ran into all these great folks that are in the middle of it and have been doing it for a long time. And I'm going to grow and diversify L&H through manufacturing microreactors. There's a supply chain that needs to be stood up in that area, and it's very interesting because I like to make things and fix things. Through that, there's a lot of opportunities for Wyoming, so I also, working with Governor Gordon, I set up this Wyoming Innovative Entrepreneurs. So I'm not only going to do that for L&H, I'm going to do that for every other like-minded entrepreneur in Wyoming that wants to join, whether it's in manufacturing metals or doing earthworks or anything else. There's a massive supply chain that needs to be stood up. And the opportunity is incredible the more I look at it, because the world needs a lot of reliable energy. And nuclear energy is very interesting to take care of the CO2 issue, help balance that out. So I'm focusing on that side of it. Through all that, I did a startup called Evercore Energy that is planning on buying these reactors and leasing energy locally and then globally. So although just in the manufacturing side and all of the other things that we can do in Wyoming and in the United States, that is really impressive growth numbers. If we buy these reactors and lease them to the world, we can have a whole nother sustainable economy and basically take care of the world's energy needs, starting in Wyoming and in the USA. And that's what I'm going to spend the rest of my life doing.
Thank you, Mike.
My name is Josh Grubaugh. I'm a board member for Jackson Hole Technology Partnership. I'm also a partner at their affiliate fund, which we call YOVC. It's a tech VC with a strong emphasis on energy and power technology. I'm also a founder of a development company called PAC Energy. PAC has a strong emphasis around microgrid deployments, which we want to use for future deployment of small nuclear microreactors. And that's one of the ways we're helping push forward the nuclear agenda here in the state. Prior in my career, I spent 20 plus years in power generation, covering fossil fuel generation, coal development, natural gas development. I've also spent time in renewables, working with solar and wind and battery storage. And then I went to the dark side in New York and worked in finance, where I was working in equity investments and bespoke debt structuring around this technology and other infrastructure technologies as well.
Thank you.
So I'm Maria Jenks, and I'm currently teaching supply chain, project management, operations management at the University of Wyoming in the College of Business. But prior to that, I'm a 25-year utility industry, energy industry executive. Most recently, vice president of supply chain for a major investor-owned utility in the Midwest. We had a diverse energy portfolio, including a 1,200 megawatt nuclear plant. So that's my background in that industry. I hope to bring forward my experience in industry to helping build out the supply chain in Wyoming. So the other project that I'm working on is with Wyoming Manufacturing Works. A few months ago, we received a federal grant through NIST to help identify the capabilities around the supply chain in certain critical sectors, industry sectors, including energy and nuclear energy in the state. So what are our capabilities? What are our opportunities? And what can we do to help strengthen and grow that supply chain, which is going to be absolutely critical to these folks here, but also to meet the future electric demand needs in a sustainable fashion going forward as well. We have to be able to support not only these pilot projects, but we also need to be planning forward this supply chain to be able to scale pretty quickly as well.
Thank you, Maria. So the next question here is for both Josh and Mike. You both are starting new firms, and they are not your traditional startup that comes from a young entrepreneur that is learning the road as they're navigating. You both have successful careers and invest in other endeavors. What are the challenges and opportunities? And I will start with challenges, because challenges, if you solve a problem that really exists out there, not an academic exercise, not a theoretical exercise, you create opportunities to develop business and entire industry. So what are the challenges and opportunities related to starting these firms that you both are starting? Josh, you can start.
So one of the key challenges is the common point of any entrepreneur being told, do one thing. And with this specific problem, it's a complex situation. There are a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of work that has to be done across multiple verticals in order to make this successful. When you're looking at microgrids, you have to look at power supply, you have to look at production, you have to look at whether or not it's going to be grid connected or not grid connected. You have to look at how the power moves around the infrastructure, and whether it's bidirectional, AC, or DC power. There's also supply chain. So once you do have the production, how are you going to contract it out, and where are you going to sell it? So if you look at this as just one thing, you're never going to start.
Thanks, Josh. Mike?
Yeah, so my challenge is I'm running L&H Industrial. We've been around 60 years, and heavy industrial manufacturing and repair. And we're really good at it. There's this need for a company to own these reactors and own this power and lease it, which I want to fill that need because I'm being called to do that, entering not only in manufacturing them, but leasing the power. And I think it's the right thing for the United States national security to do that. But it's, the beginning project, which I thought was going to be, 100 million, 200 million, it's $1 billion project. So that's interesting scale, right? So it's very big. The problem's very big. And I think the biggest challenge is putting the team together, because I'm only going to do it with somebody with the right mission, vision, values. So their mission, vision, values have to match mine. And leasing is a lot easier than manufacturing and repairing, so that doesn't scare me. I mean, a triple net lease. I'm deep enough into the nuclear reactors now, microreactors, that doesn't scare me. We can do that. We can do it right. And even finding the tribe, it doesn't scare me. I think it's really getting really clear on what our mission, vision, values are, and getting that out to the world. That's going to attract the right team members. And we can only scale as fast as we can put good people. Now, finding really for the United States to lead energy. It's really hundreds of billions a year that needs to be deployed, and it needs to be deployed by thoughtful people that are going to do it right and going to be in it for the long term. That's the challenge. And I don't know what piece or part of that challenge I'm going to be in. I know I'm going to be in part of it. I'm going to help lead it and guide it. We will make it happen. We have to make it happen, right? The people of the world are going to demand it. And there's nobody else better to do it than the United States. And in the United States, there's nobody else better to do it than Wyoming. So we've got to start. We can do as much as we want to. And it's going to take everybody to make it happen.
Thank you, Josh. And Mike, I will come back a little bit more in opportunities. But Maria and Joe, this is for you. Listening to this vision that both Josh and Mike have with Pack Energy and Evercore, and hearing a little bit about the challenges. How do you think BWXT is a technology developer, a manufacturing firm, and the University of Wyoming in the different groups you work can help and support, enable this private sector leadership in solving these challenges and then later seizing the opportunity? So Maria, do you would like to start?
So as I listen to this and I understand the trajectory, the projections for electricity demand in the United States, by 2050 it's going to increase by threefold at least, and a big part of that is going to have to be the nuclear industry and a lot of these projects. I can't help but think about how we have to strategically look at and invest in the supply chains in order to even make this happen. So we certainly have a lot going for us, like they mentioned. We have many decades of supporting the nuclear industry from a supply chain perspective, very successfully, safely, reliably. We have a lot of lessons learned from all of that. Certainly the state of Wyoming has a lot of capabilities in terms of understanding what it takes to support the energy industry, both from an individual perspective as well as from businesses. So there's a lot going for us. But the rate at which we're going to have to not only prove that we can make these pilot projects work, but also start planning ahead for being able to scale all of this, because that's really super important. We got to start working on that now, because the rate at which we're going to have to scale to meet these electricity demands and what have you, as well as these other things that we'd like to do, is unlike any kind of scaling effort that we've seen in the nuclear industry probably ever, even when it was peak. So while we have good capabilities, there are some gaps, because the supply chain, especially for the next gen nuclear, is there are some differences. There's similarities, but there are some differences as well. So how do we leverage the good stuff we've done, but also kind of identify those gaps, work with suppliers to build the capability in a fashion that is going to generate value up and down the entire chain, and also be very cost effective while maintaining our safety and reliability. I would say the other challenge is making sure that we don't over apply all of the nuclear regulation in terms of getting all this going as well. So while it's very important to maintain safety and reliability, and all these regulations are really important, I think taking more of a risk-based approach to some of them as well, and being very clear on which designs and which procurements and which components need to be that nuclear grade certification versus those that could be non-nuclear grade, so that we, all these kinds of things, and there's more, but a lot of considerations in order to scale things.
Thank you, Maria. Joe, when we Google BWXT, you see BWXT is involving in the fuel cycle. It's involving strategic and defense applications of nuclear power. You learn about the project with Wyoming that we know about it, but there are other civilian application projects going on too. But in the end, you were a technology developer in a manufacturing business that is advanced this technology. How do you see the role of BWXT supporting the private sector to apply that technology to things that add value and enhance energy security and reduce emissions?
Well, in my perspective, we have the most fun role. We get to build the reactor, right? That's the best, right? We get to build the technology. We will deploy that technology in the next few years. We will be proving that technology in the next few years, and then we need to scale up. So that's where the challenges are. But we're not worried about being able to build reactors. We've built 400 reactors plus, and we build them all day, every day. We build them in the US, we build them in Canada. We make fuel all day, every day in large scale quantities. So it's the demand signal, and that's why I'm so excited about what's been happening in the US. Several years ago, the Department of Energy got very serious about deploying new nuclear reactors through the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program. Following that, Project Pele through the Strategic Capabilities Office. Following that, almost immediately, was Wyoming, coming and looking at commercial deployment. So the momentum is there. Now the fun begins. Building the reactors, operating these reactors, scaling up fuel production, scaling up the entire supply chain. And to me, it's galvanizing the country around energy, and it's galvanizing the country around nuclear because all of those three things are taking part. So it's not just the US government. They kickstarted this initiative. Wyoming picked up on it early. They're making real decisions. They're in Wyoming is very focused. This group of people that are here are very focused on making this successful. So it's just a matter of going through all of the hurdles that will be in front of us, and we can do it. We'll do it as a team. We'll have to do it through a manufacturing lens, right? And real recognizes real. That's why we're so excited to be here in Wyoming, because we know the demand signal is real. So now we have to commit to building those reactors and scaling up and making energy on demand a reality.
Thank you. Mike and Josh, hearing those perspectives from Maria and Joe, elaborating a little bit more, if you will, in your challenge, but what is the opportunity? Why we should gather this tribe, using your words, Mike? And Josh, how can we get this, understand really the challenges and then move forward in a scalable way to do business? What are the opportunities? What is the vision? What is the horizon? Where we are walking to?
So I think the people on the stage are unique in the sense that they're forward-thinking. Mike was one of the first people I came across that was thinking about nuclear reactor leasing other than myself. And for that reason, like, I absolutely respect him. There's so much room for competition here, but what we're doing is barely going to take a dent in the overall demand, so it's not really competitive, it's collaborative. And taking that approach is what's really going to make this successful. When you approach that same perspective with the supply chain, it allows us to make little steps forward that allow the supply chain to make little steps forward. For BWXT, their experience in nuclear reactor design and development and deployment is actually making bigger steps forward that allow us to make bigger steps forward. It's all about us working together to move this whole industry forward in a way that actually allows us all to address a problem that really needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I resonate that it's all abundance, right? There's no shortage. So even if every one of us in this room set up leasing companies that were exactly like each other's, and we did as much as we could, you still aren't making an impact in how much energy is needed. The threefold increase in energy, and that threefold increase in energy is in the United States, right? And I look back at energy, and it doubles. The demand for energy doubles every 20 years. Does that sound about right? Yeah, you're doubling demand for energy every 20 years. And if you don't fill that demand, price goes up, right? So when you see countries where your price is crazy, Germany, it's because they had a demand shortage, right? Or they had a supply shortage and demand's making the price go crazy. That is coming in the US, and the voters are not gonna like that. The consumers end up paying that bill. And so that's the problem that we have to solve, and we've taken too many years off of reliable energy being deployed in the United States. So therefore, for about 10 years, our costs are going to go up dramatically, and people are going to lose their mind. And that's what's going to push this forward. So that's not a terrible thing. It's just going to push good, sensible energy deployment forward, and our timing is great. And thank goodness BWXT has agreed to play with Wyoming and help us set up, because they do this all the time. They've built 400 reactors. They're not playing around. They just do this for a living for 100 and some years, but 50, 60 years in reactors.
That's right.
We are very fortunate, and to all the people, Wyoming Energy Authority and the governor, for moving that forward and connecting with BWXT. Not to take anything away from TerraPower, that was a magnificent landing as well. But this BWXT one is also next level. So I think the question was the vision of how this is going to look. So I don't believe coal, oil, and gas are going anywhere, and neither does anybody that knows energy. We need it. We're going to have it. Now, there's a problem with CO2 that has to be curbed, and nuclear can be part of solving that problem, right, as we keep deploying energy. So we're going to keep doing everything we're doing in this state, and we're going to add another dispatchable energy that we can lease from this state to the world. We have to start locally, right? And then we'll work it out globally. But imagine being able to build thousands of reactors a year, and don't sell those reactors. Buy them into a holding company that's owned and headquartered in Wyoming and lease them across the globe, 1,000 megawatts a year, 10,000 megawatts a year. We need that much. And lease that power, and then bring those reactors back and refuel them and send them out again for another lease. You talk about the energy capital of the world. Wyoming in the United States has the opportunity to be the Saudi Arabia of energy with dispatchable microreactors. That's the vision. That's going to happen. And I believe it's going to happen in the United States, because as I talk to my friends around the globe, they trust the United States to do this and to do it right and to keep these machines fed and cared for, right? So that's really interesting when you think about it, and it's not a replacement of, it's in addition to, which is incredibly powerful. So we don't have to burn what we're doing and move everything to this. Keep doing what we're doing. Let's figure out how to capture CO2. You've funded that as well. That's beautiful. We need to do that. And let's start taking care of this triple energy need by 2050, which is no joke, for the United States. And then if the United States is, has energy security and energy leadership for the world, guess what? Our energy costs are lower for our citizens. That's pretty cool. The voters are going to like that. So that's the big vision. Now back to my roots. I like to manufacture things, so I love working with Joe and Josh on manufacturing parts for all these reactors. And I think that too, we need to have competition in that, because competition makes the world better, and anybody that wants to stand up and manufacture parts to go into the reactors, there's room for everybody.
Josh, just to add to that, I think the competition is critical because it keeps prices honest. Yeah. And when you look at the grand scale of this, the U.S. conservative prices are in the trillions by 2050 in terms of power and transmission additions. Globally, that's tens of trillions. It's a massive number. And when you look at the finite resource of energy and of different types of energy, we're gonna have to work together to address this globally. And we can play our part here to do it in a way that's safe and secure. But it's also about figuring out how to help the rest of the world at the same time. And like when I was in New York, I joked earlier tongue-in-cheek about my dark times in finance, but in reality, I was helping structure a fund to make Apple and Apple products carbon neutral in China. And it's something that we did out of New York and worked collaboratively with a massive global company to address, to decrease emissions in China, which is a huge problem. And that's a collaborative effort. It's a global collaborative effort.
So I think we become the platform, right? And since there's room for everybody, and we need everybody that's like-minded on deck. You know, we're already starting it, but we become the platform, and we become the example, and we open source, and we wrap IP around it, and Wyoming becomes a platform. The United States becomes a platform of how it's done.
So Josh, Mike, and Joe, you wear all day your private sector hat, and then Maria, I want to ask you to put your old hat that right now is still very valuable of working for utility and nuclear. The question is, how can this private sector-led endeavor have very specific asks? And what are those asks for the governmental sector, for the universities, the community college? That's called the public sector. Like a lot of times we discuss in preparations for this, the valley of death, that there's a mismatch that seems to be growing from my perspective between allocation of resources priorities between the private and the public sector. And it was not always like that. During World War II efforts and post-World War II, this country has amazing industrial growth, and those interests and those allocation of resources seem to be more aligned. So we have members here of the public sector, university, higher ed educations. We have representatives from the executive, from the legislative agencies. How can they enable this growth that you are seeing, to seize this opportunity that you are pursuing?
Sure. So right out of college, I had a CEO that used to say, I want to be the first to develop a gas turbine generator after 50 other companies do it. And I laughed at it. He's like, it's low risk. It's great. That's no problem. You can make a lot of money. But in this situation, it's hard to deploy that way. But you can. It's just about thinking about it differently. BWXT is an example of a company that has deployed multiple micronuclear reactors, is moving forward with Project Pele to set the standard and set an example of demonstrating data collection that it's proven technology. What I'm trying to do with PAC Energy is create a construct that allows proven technology to be deployed, not just here in Wyoming, but across the US and globally. And you've got companies like LNH who are going to enable that supply chain to work. We have to think about addressing the concern when the financial investors think like my old CEO did. They don't want to take any risk. So how do we figure out ways of decreasing at least the optics of that risk? One is smaller nuclear reactors do help. It decreases the capital cost of the equipment that you're buying. Leasing models help. It decreases the cost for the development to be deployed. So those two examples alone bring that gap down in a way that a lot of people haven't thought about before. But
and how the public sector can help addressing those issues you just mentioned.
So the public sector, so as a developer, I would always approach developing a project addressing fatal flaw risks first. Once I get the fatal flaws out of the way, I then develop on a risk-adjusted curve. We call it an S-curve, to spend as little as possible to continue to de-risk a project until a point where you actually think it's viable, and then you go for a revenue contract. Typically, at this point, it was a utility-backed or government-backed utility contract, 20-year PPA, 15-year PPA, 10-year PPA. Now it's a lot more common for corporate PPAs. But those revenue contracts were what underwrote the rest of this development cycle, which was essentially developing with non-recourse debt financing in mind. And enabling private sector through collaboration, support, low-cost loans, grants in certain situations, or even contracts. Like the DoD is doing a lot of work. DoD slingshot examples could accelerate this extremely fast.
Thank you, Josh. Joe, I see you want to jump in this.
Yeah, so from our perspective, it is clearly articulating exactly what's needed for the reactor and what scale up looks like. So now that we have the supply chain established for our initial microreactor project, how do we parlay that into other opportunities that exist? And communicating those opportunities to be able to set the stage for infrastructure development from the public sector is important. And then also from universities, having the right kinds of academic institutions focusing on the right type of people that are needed to build these reactors, to develop the supply chains, and then also look more into the future on what a deployment model can look like to benefit the U.S. and to benefit globally, like Mike talked about. So it starts with understanding the problem, deriving all of the inputs to solve that problem, and then communicating that to the public sector, to the other participants in the private sector, and then making sure that the holistic plan identifies the gaps and the faults very early so we can address those. Sometimes they're long lead, and it's not just materials or sourcing supply. Sometimes a long lead is setting up additional academic opportunities for students to explore how they can invest in themselves to prepare for future nuclear. So that's the reason why the new contract with Wyoming was so important to us, because we get to look at things from licensing basis to material supply to supply chain to how are we going to scale up internally to BWXT TRISO fuel manufacturing, and how are we going to reduce that cost, right? And when we have a recurring cost because you have to replace that fuel every several years, how can that go into the larger picture from an economic development and then also an economic opportunity for energy supply? So as we learn more about what the requirements are for deployment, we're also receiving a lot of input from a variety of different companies that want to deploy these reactors. So that closes the gap between Mike and Josh talking about leasing these reactors. Now we have end users, and then we will eventually have to close that loop with what do we do as we scale up and we refuel, and how do we on-ramp more and more components, and how do we service each one of the units, and how do we monitor these units from central locations, and all of that goes into play. And the study that we have now helps address that on a commercial scale, where we have been hyper-focused on a prototype to prove the technology, but now we're focusing or layering in all the commercial aspects of what that scale up. So the public sector is going to be crucial to making sure that the stage is set, well understood, and then that investment exists.
So if I summarize those comments there before Mike and Maria go to add their comments, we talk about priming the pump with some incentives or low interest loans. We talk about a facilitate process of discovery, helping to connect the dots, help to navigate complexity and uncertainty. And then what more we are missing here, Maria and Mike, that could be complementing the priming the pump and the coordination collaboration efforts.
So I was going to just talk a little bit more about the labor side, because we have a gap now, but as we try to scale up on the nuclear side in these, the next gen, we will have a need for even more labor. So I saw I read somewhere that there's a projection we're going to need another 1 million people working in the nuclear industry over the next several years. That's a lot of people. And if you think about just today, the current nuclear fleet that we have, and I can't speak for BWXT or anything like that, but I know in the current nuclear industry, we're already hurting for talent. We went through a number of years here in the United States where we were top of the world with our nuclear fleet and supporting and all that, and we are from a performance perspective. But for a while, it kind of looked like we didn't know if our nuclear fleet was going to get relicensed. And so a lot of students just started flocking away from going into the nuclear industry. We need to bring that back. I think we're starting to, and the University of Wyoming with the School of Energy Resources and our engineering and all that I think are primed to help start filling that pipeline again, as well as other universities. But I wanted to talk beyond just the universities, and we have to also think about investing in the trades as well. So again, for next gen nuclear, There are some differences in the technologies that are used and the types of materials that are used and all that, and so we will have to look at reskilling folks as well and training them in how to operate and maintain, let alone construct, these new reactors as well. So from that standpoint, and then from a construction standpoint, we were in the nuclear industry very good at on-site or field construction. The next gen nuclear is more of a modular approach, which we don't have as much experience in as well. So, so from a project management, construction management standpoint, those are some other skill sets that we need to employ. And then finally, throughout all this with the universities, the community colleges and trade schools and all of that, making sure that we, help capture lessons learned, industry best practices in all of these realms, and facilitate consortiums and centers of excellence and those types of things where we can share that knowledge. Those are the kinds of things that will create that spark to create some, momentum and build capabilities as well.
Mike, do you have anything to add in that?
Yeah.
Let me just elaborate a little bit. Because you work in developing a fantastic firm based in Wyoming, grew globally. You also work solving problems in economic development when you're board of the Wyoming Business Council. You're leading Wyoming innovative entrepreneurs. And so all those initiatives are trying to close that gap between private and public investment and interest in alignment. So building up what Joe and Josh and Maria said, what is more missing there? Because after these easy questions, I will have the hard question for all four of you because it's not happening, but we'll get there in a second.
I like the hard questions. I look forward to that. So I have been very interested in growing and diversifying Wyoming's economy since 2010, and I really appreciate what the government does and how the government in the United States and in Wyoming works. It's the best government in the world. There's a lot of people that don't see that, but they haven't been around the world. And then academia, I have a lot better understanding of what academia's role is too. Nuclear's been demonized the same way coal is demonized, right? Maybe worse, I don't know. But that is what the educators can help with, right? Get people, and also the government can help with this too. Get people the truth about nuclear energy, and because the truth is a beautiful thing, it's incredible. So we just need to continue spreading the word about the truth of nuclear energy and the truth of radiation, because I've been grappling with why does a collective consciousness hate nuclear energy? And it kind of flips back to the Jaws movie, right? Why do people hate great white sharks? Because of the Jaws movie, right? It's fascinating. But we need to unwind that, and we've done a pretty good job. A lot of people I talk to, it doesn't take long to show them the truth. They get it, right? And a lot of the younger voters in the world, they get it. They know that nuclear energy needs to come online. But they're still scared of it, right? There's still this demonization that please help correct that, because it is clean, it is safe, it has been forever. So I think that's what the academia and the government can do, and continue giving people the truth. Now the government has a lot bigger role. It's no joke that you're going to at least double the need for energy or triple it, and it's no joke that energy prices just went up 33%. The average, to the best of my calculation, the average voter in the United States, 25% of their wallet goes to energy, right? So that's either through fuel or through electricity or through the stuff they buy and how much electricity costs. Now, we're getting ready very quickly, within a few years here, a couple of years probably, of making that 50% of their wallet. Voters are not going to like that. I don't think it's going to take 10x like it took Germany for the voters to show up and be really mad. Because I think the big lie has been that, yeah, we're going to do all of this stuff, but you're not going to have to pay for it. Don't worry about that. No, the consumers pay for everything, right? So the truth always, you can delay it. The government can delay how long, when it hits them, but you can't stop the consumers from having to pay the bill. And so we need to put electricity, reliable electricity and affordable electricity on the grid, and we need to double it, and we need to solve the CO2 problem. So that's where I think it comes to tripling it. Really, we've got to put triple the energy on the grid by 2050, and we're not doing that, right? So now the federal government has to show up, and they have to prime the pump. That's a good name for it, because energy will support itself. The space race, and liken it to the space race, right? So what the government did with NASA, they started about 2005, right? And they started priming the pump with Elon Musk and SpaceX and Blue Origin, and they started priming the pump with these guys. They're doing the same thing right now with energy. So they have to get out of the way, right? They have to allow competition in. They have to prime the pump and fund that competition. And they have to solve this problem, because the price of energy can't triple, because then the average voter is going to be paying 75 or 100% of their income, and they're going to be suffering, and that doesn't work. So this is going to happen, has to happen. How much pain gets put on the voters before it happens, I don't know. But we're at a good spot, and I'm still not 100% clear on the all of the things that have to happen, but I know that these microreactors are a big step towards solving this problem.
Yeah, and Mike, to your point, some of the data is just misleading. LCOE as a metric, I think, is a little bit flawed. And for us going forward, I think looking at GDP per kilowatt hour is a good way of changing our mindset.
Before I go here to more direct to the point, putting my finger in the wound, do you have any questions for us coming from you sitting there listening to this? Any specific questions that can help us to move? Steve?
Yeah, Steve. Steve Allmeyer with Idaho National Lab. So following up on just getting more specific on Marcio's question, good moderator, on what's the role of the state, what's the role of the government. So I'm looking at the Frontiers project sign. So Frontiers refers to positioning the U.S. at the forefront of this frontier of economic competition. So what are you going to do this next year to leverage the project, the BWXT project, to get low emission industry from Wyoming on the global market? How are you gonna build that global market piece? And is there a role for the state in that global positioning? And we'll come back next year and see what your progress is. So.
You want me to start?
Please.
So right after the press release came out on the Wyoming contract, the first call that we got was from Governor Youngkin in Virginia. Like, you guys are a Virginia company. How did this come about, right? And so we said, hey, Wyoming's been working on nuclear for several years. They've thought through licensing basis. They've had meaningful conversations with the Department of Energy. The Frontiers Initiative is real, and so how can we support was the next question that came from that office. And it was very meaningful because the focus isn't the mining industry in Virginia. It's more about data centers and other applications that microreactors can serve. And so what our response was, the focus for BWXT in commercial microreactors is Wyoming. That demonstration will occur. We feel very faithful to that. So however you can support Governor Gordon, however you can support Wyoming in making this initiative real and ramp up and put it on a larger scale is going to be the truth telling on how other state governments and how they can help provide proactive optimism to the federal government. The second call we got was from an extremely large company that is putting in new data centers that are constrained in growth. They're constrained in growth because most of the power they use for that data center is carbon emitting. and the local governments throughout the world no longer allow that. So they now have a cap on growth, and large companies do not like caps on growth. So how can we support this? What can you do for our company as BWXT? The answer was the same. Focus on what's happening in Wyoming, participate, understand, give us input requirements so we can set the stage on the private and public sector to be able to prepare for that scale up. So the momentum has been enormous. You see it throughout the conversations that we're having internally and externally. You can see it in our stock price, right? And this is just a big deal because people know that there is a huge threat on energy security, and it will constrain, I think, the prosperity of humankind. And so being able to focus on that is going to be important. And what we will be doing is, just like we're doing for Pele and Draco, we will be hyper-focused on commercial nuclear reactors in Wyoming. And I think whatever participants are serious, they'll come here and they'll understand more about what's happening here and be able to use that in their individual business or government cases.
Josh, Mike, or Maria, anything else to add?
Yeah, so the LNH, we're going to be quoting parts to BWXT. We'll quote any of the microreactor or the small modular reactor nuclear companies so that we can scale, right? So you have 2 or 3 customers. I see that being mostly U.S.-based manufacturers, but maybe it'll go into Canada or something. Evercore Energy is a lot bigger thought, and that is we're going to start local because we have to and learn what works, but Evercore will sell to big, heavy industrial users, mining companies, manufacturing companies, foundries, and I know these guys all over the world, right? And although it's, the United States, we are very spoiled on low-cost, reliable energy, right? There's not a huge demand yet. We just talked about the fact that there is a problem coming that we need to cure, but we'll cure it very quickly. Probably take us 10 years. And then the leasing of reactors is much more interesting around the world. I already have my friends in the foundry business and in the mining world. They would cut an order now. So I think understanding the demand, and I think pre-selling. So let's pre-sell. Let's do the Tesla model. Let's pre-sell 10 or 20 years worth of reactors. That helps us set up the sizing of the factory, and I'll focus on the heavy industrial side of it. Somebody else can focus on the residential and all the other things, and we can use the same model and solve this problem.
Yeah, for PAC Energy, Joe, you covered some of the key points as to our thesis around co-locating stable power with stable demand. Specifically, edge data is a good example because of the uptime requirement and proving out the thesis of the stability of the core structure. But the idea is to get it on the ground today using technology that's currently available to allow for a drop-in of nuclear microreactors when they're ready. How do we get them to be ready faster? Pre-selling is a great idea.
Maria?
So this is obviously an exciting time for Wyoming. For me, personally, in the near term, I'm going to be fighting the battle in the trenches. So working with Wyoming Manufacturing Works, the Wyoming Business Council, Wyoming Energy Authority, and others, obviously throughout the state, to help build that, identify gaps in and build out that supply chain infrastructure, the ecosystem, to collectively increase this competition and properly support these industries, as well as take advantage of this opportunity to help economic development in the state as well. So what can we do in the trenches to help Wyoming manufacturers, to connect them with opportunities and to help them take advantage of this exciting time in the state?
Thank you. Any other questions? Follow up from Steve Oman.
Just a quick follow-up. So you have 3 other advanced nuclear energy first mover states, right, that are all interested in non-grid applications and grid applications. What do you want us to do, or do you want us to do something to formalize a partnership, bring those people here to kind of begin to get more comfort in this application space? Is there something we should be doing proactively the next year relative to partnerships with those stakeholders in those 3 states.
And if I understand correctly, in other regions of the country?
No, they all happen to be generally in the west and north. So what are those states? It's Alaska, Utah, Idaho, in addition to Wyoming. Those are all declared advanced nuclear first movers. Well, you have Texas as well with X-Energy. So is there some partnership to be had that can help you establish global leadership?
Yeah, I think that there's only abundance of need in energy, and mine's going to be, if they match my mission, vision, and values, come on, let's go. Help me, right? And if you're better at something, then I need to back off and let you lead it. Great, but everybody's welcome. We need a massive amount of people doing this and making the lift.
Yeah, I think you just defined the next step. Right now that we have the contract and we have a mission in Wyoming, the mission for other first mover states should have that collective conversation. What are the next couple of steps, and what does that contribution look like from the other first mover states? And it's probably time to start having that conversation now. And then there's another event here in a couple of weeks in Alaska, and that will be a focus of my conversation as well. What we're doing in Wyoming is very meaningful, and it's going to take a lot of time and effort, but how can we make the most value out of that from the objectives from Alaska, Utah, and Idaho?
Yeah, engagement with those states is first step, in my opinion. And then engagement from those states to their people and their communities is second. Education here is critical. People need to stop fearing the technology. You made a comment earlier, and I was thinking in my head, like watching The Simpsons as a child with the demonized Montgomery Burns as this evil owner of a nuclear power plant. And these really dumb people running nuclear power plants. And you're like, kids grew up with that. And now those kids are adults. And we have to break that kind of a mentality.
Yeah, it's a great question. No, we're not going to be successful working on this in a silo, of course. As a country, we are going to have to collaborate and break down those silos and work together on this if we're going to be successful. That's a certainty.
I would say that you're better off to go with fewer people that share your values and share your mission, because there's going to be a lot of people that just aren't there to help, right? So smaller and more nimble with technology. We don't need a massive amount of people. We just need the right people.
Yeah, there was an NEC commissioner I met in the early 2000s, and he said there are 5 or 6 big projects across the U.S. right now trying to move forward, and I don't want that. I want one. Because if we can get one done right, it sends the right message to everybody.
We have another question from the back, too. Yeah.
Okay. This is Don Burkhart, Representative Don Burkhart. So I want to follow up on Steve's question, which is, but I'll get a little bit more direct. What does Wyoming need to do? The regional collaboration is great. We've already done some things. What else does Wyoming need to do? I think we've removed almost every roadblock I can think of except some tax structure for the nuclear industry. So thoughts on that?
It's like the field of dreams. You built it, now they will come. So I think attracting those participants, and so being vocal, and back to Mike's point, for the participants that are optimistic and are focused on progress. I think now that you have the Terra Power projects moving forward, this BWXT project is moving forward, you have built that field of dreams. So now being more vocal about attracting the others that can emphasize everything that you've already put into what you put in. And there are going to be issues that we will have to address collectively as this project moves forward. And having the right people focusing on those issues is going to be crucial. So I think being that leader that you've already established and using that leadership mentality to attract other leaders that will benefit from this immediately is going to be really important. And that's something Wyoming can do very specifically, especially out of the government office.
There's also a great panel set up tomorrow at the Wyoming Global Technology Summit to address that question specifically. And a few of the people in this room will be on that panel to discuss it openly.
So to the Wyoming innovative entrepreneurs, to make it sticky in Wyoming, any of these Wyoming innovative entrepreneurs that are already here, deep-rooted, proven, when they say, ooh, I want to do that, right? I want to go after that, then Wyoming should, support that enthusiastically. And hopefully that's a disbursement around the state, and hopefully it's a disbursement of everything. We got Tyler with Earthworks here. Hopefully he's the one that's doing the site work and whatever else he wants to do. And those companies that do it first are going to become the company that all of these guys call when they need a siting, right? Or they need a new part made, or they need graphite made. So it's an opportunity for Wyoming to really robustly enter the supply chain in a lot of meaningful ways for microreactors, and then when you talk about TerraPower for the small modular reactors. And it's really important to support them and lean it towards the innovative entrepreneurs that are deep-rooted here, because Wyoming's not very sticky. I was on the business council. I funded a lot of companies that came in, and then they flip out of the state very quickly because there's, they go down to Colorado or whatever, and some of those other states will throw a lot more money at them to lure them away. So I think Wyoming has to realize that the ones that are here, that are born here, that have headquarters here, are probably going to stay here. They got multi-generational. Think of the Nyman family, right? They've made Newcastle what it is. It's Hewlett, yeah, and that works here. So I think not getting ran away with new shiny people, and make sure that they lean those towards people that are going to stay here anyway. They're going to be here and they're going to do it, and if we can help them, they'll do it bigger.
We'll have one more question there.
Yeah, this is Scott Nolan from Founders Fund. I had a two-part question on things people said earlier. Joe, you said something about 2030 as the initial rollout timeline that you guys had in mind, but then it turned out to not be true. It sounded like maybe faster. So I was wondering, how are you thinking about milestones and timing at this point of your rollout? And then, Mike, you mentioned you went into things thinking, hey, this is going to be $100, $200 million sort of projects, but they're more like billion-dollar projects. So I was wondering, specifically, do you think these are the opportunities in micro or small modular reactors? And what are those, how are you seeing those project costs in these initial projects, like really, really specifically?
Yeah, so for the rollout milestones, 2025 will be our delivery for the microreactor for the Department of Defense. So between 2025 and 2030, we need to have a microreactor operating here in Wyoming. And that's the point of the study, determining everything that has to happen from regulatory influence to scaling up the power demand and applying this directly to the Trono patch. All of that will be well understood through this study. And we were originally thinking, like I mentioned, and like you restated, the inflection point would happen in 2030, but it's 7 years earlier. And so now to be able to prepare for that, I feel really optimistic because there are other participants that are going to fill the gaps that BWXT isn't addressing. And so I do feel confident before the end of the decade, we will have an operating commercial microreactor. And it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of effort, but that's what I love anyway, so it's going to be fun.
Yeah, Todd Allen have a question in the back there.
So the question on the costs, that's what you're wondering. So the reason that it went from 50 million to 200 million to $1 billion is just the sheer need for energy. We have to do this, and then the need to curb CO2, right? So we can't or we shouldn't just go back and add a bunch more CO2 to the environment by scaling energy, and we're going to have to if we don't put reactors online. And I don't think there's any competition between micros and the SMRs or the big ones. I think we need all of them, every one of them, as much as people are willing to put online. And I think the government should support all of them. Now, I do think the bigger ones are going to be closer to highly populated areas, right? So because of line loss, so you're going to see the bigger ones go there, and But I think for Wyoming, for me, the most interesting one are the micros. If I can lease energy and I can dispatch those to a mine in some remote area, and then 10 years later they don't want them anymore, and I can move them to some other customer somewhere else and keep doing that for 50 years, that is a really compelling thing for Evercore. It's a really compelling thing for the United States to have a private company that owns those reactors versus Russia. They're going to be state-owned reactors. Russia's already doing that, but they're state-owned. That's not as interesting as private-owned, right? If we have 5 or 10 private-owned companies that are trusted, they have to be trusted, that we can keep anchored in the U.S., and I hope we can keep at least one of those anchored in Wyoming. That's a really compelling offer.
Yeah,
and I think it will be on the first few, just like in manufacturing, they are going to be expensive. This is going to be expensive. You start scaling where we're building tens of these, hundreds of them, thousands of them. I don't see any reason it can't be very competitive energy, period.
Yeah, I think that scale for volume is essentially what it's going to take to really launch the supply chains to dollar cost average down the price so it's achievable for all of them.
We got to stop making reactors that are all custom. That's not very smart. That's very expensive.
Todd?
Yeah. Yep. It's Todd Allen, University of Michigan. One question and one suggestion, 2 totally different topics. So following up, Joe, on your comment about data centers, does anything need to be done to incentivize more on the demand side, right? Or are the customers there, right? So maybe it's hydrogen, so that's one. And then on the suggestion, it follows, Josh, your point about public acceptance. I mean, I think one of the issues beyond the Simpson was the nuclear community was not very inviting. If you're not industry or military, you don't even know what it looks like, right? So I think one other potential advantage of microreactors is you let people see them, right? Figure out how to make Wyoming the tourist attraction, right? It's a small world after all, 21st century version, right? But figure out a way, right, to let people see what they are, experience them, not be intimidated, because we did not do that well, first generation.
Yeah, just to answer your question about the demand, it was the reason why we were thinking 2030. We thought we would have to have this grassroots effort to build the demand signal. Didn't need to, and that's why it's moved so far to the left, because that demand is there. And then we talked about the scale, like how many microreactors do you need to produce to give me a terawatt? It's like, I'll call you back in a couple of weeks. But then you think about it, you chop that up into smaller sections, you chop that up into different industries, and you think about the different swim lanes of application for microreactors. I feel more positive about commercial demand than ever before, and it's because there is a threat of growth, capping growth. There is a threat in energy security, and then more importantly, there is this threat on global climate change. So if you add all those three things together with all of the opportunity that secure energy provides, then the demand's going to be there, and I no longer worry about that, and it's good because we have a business development effort that's very focused, and Josh knows that for sure, Josh Parker. And so that business development effort is now focusing on finding those partners that have like-minded views, much like what Mike talked about. And then that also hasn't been a problem too, mainly because of what Wyoming has provided over the last several years.
Jumped empty.
Of Energy Resources, and the work that's going on down in Laramie. Are there any plans for like nuclear education classes, manufacturing works relative to nuclear power and supply chain, manufacturing works, just as a way to sort of like help establish the workforce that's going to be required? I also view that as, that's human capital, pretty valuable, what Mike talks about. There's a certain type of person that wants to be a founder or an entrepreneur. If they're clued up to the opportunities, I think it fits well with sort of the history of this state being energy focused. And I think that plays a pretty big role as we look at how these entrepreneurial ecosystems develop, whether it's in, SaaS or, whatever. You look at what's happened. They all sort of kind of cluster around an academic institution on some level. And I think just having plans within the next year to sort of like launch some of those educational sort of opportunities at the University of Wyoming throughout the different schools, to me seems like a way that Wyoming could set itself apart. So I was just wondering, are there any plans for anything like that down at the university?
Yeah, so I'm in the College of Business. I can't speak for the School of Energy Resources per se, but a lot of these things are starting to transpire right now. So there's not only has the university done some hiring in terms of energy savvy professionals, economists, that type of thing, but there are specific nuclear programs going on as well, different grants to incentivize those kind of opportunities. And just to give you one example, there is some nuclear education programs that are happening as a collaboration between the College of Business and the School of Energy Resources as well. So the hope is that we can grow these and do much more, but at least they have started and they are underway.
So there's a multiple answer for that question. Steve can make a quick comment here. I will have a comment too for you, John.
Yeah, so one thing, John, I sit on Holly's Nuclear Energy Research Advisory. I don't know what NERC stands for. But we just had a meeting this week, and I've got to tell you, I'm pretty impressed with what the university's done in starting their capacity building. And they did that based on a couple $1 million that were appropriated by the Wyoming legislature for that. So all the capture of grants and such aside, I think they're already up to about $4 million. So from zero to that in a year, it's really good. But one really exciting thing, we worked with Hawley and Company to put together the university's first nuclear energy course. And it's called Fundamentals of Nuclear Energy. So Jess and his organization helped do that. And I just had an update from the professor who's doing that under an INL contract this week, and she told me she's really impressed with the breadth of students that have signed up. I think they have 45 students, so the interest is high. Students from everything from English majors to business majors to, of course, a lot of engineers, but that's okay. Across the spectrum, energy land management folks. So the question is that they're dealing with now is, what do they do with that? Where do they go with it? So I think the university and Hawley deserve a lot of credit for standing that up. And I think this group, our Frontiers and Emmett group, helped a lot in putting that course together. So power of partnerships. There you go.
So I think we're on time here, correct? Do you have one more question there? 2 more questions, and then we'll wrap up a little bit here.
Hey, I'm Sarah Fitzgerald with the Wyoming Business Council. I had a quick follow-up on the demand side policy question, or the demand side question, because it sounds like the demand is there. But on an industry scale, other states are our customers, obviously. We're exporting this for the most part, probably. And they are, Western states especially, are creating all kinds of different policies around CO2 and climate change. And I'm wondering, from the nuclear perspective specifically, how should we think about our partnerships and relationships with our customer states and influencing how they develop those policies? Because time is kind of the essence in that world right now.
I would think that it was going to start with the siting and licensing aspects of the reactors, and then also it almost feels like it's Wyoming proving the technology, proving the application, and proving how all of the processes and policies within the state need to conform to nuclear, and then using that to directly communicate specific actions to other states is going to be crucial. So when we thought through the statement of work on the BWXT Wyoming initiative with the Energy Authority, that statement of work was hyper-focused on everything that you just stated. So we can port the information, the output of that report real time. We don't have to wait, to the conclusion report, but it's almost the real-time application of how technology and policy in a state intersect, using that output to communicate to other states on how they can almost have a jump start on how they prepare themselves for the future of nuclear.
Yeah, we're going to be leasing them clean energy in the future, right? So 10 years from now, we're going to be leasing, Wyoming-owned company leasing them energy that we can dispatch to them. So that they need to set the policies up, but they need to also just stay out of the way, right? Let private industry do it. So, and I think the other thing that we have to realize is whenever we're adding costs to energy and it's not adding value, the consumers have to pay for that. They're gonna. You might delay it a little bit, but the consumers are gonna have to pay for that, and their costs are too high already. But it's going to come back down to you've got to get everything you can out of the way so we can deploy as much reliable energy as quickly as possible so that we can pull that cost of energy down for our citizens. And adding bureaucracy and layers and rules that don't help will just make that harder. And the voters are going to be looking when their energy prices double, right? So there's going to be accountability around all of those costs and all of anything that doesn't make sense and keep people safe.
I think this is a great example to reiterate the comment from earlier this morning. Maybe it's not always public-private partnerships. Maybe it's private-public partnerships. Yeah. Private companies, I think I need to lead the way, talking to states, governments, communities, and making sure that they're doing what they can to pave the way and make it easier to get things on the ground faster.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Curtis Biggs here with University of Wyoming, and just to follow up on Josh's comment on the public-private partnership, but also specifically to address the question earlier from John Tempty on the engagement from the university and how that's shaken out some fine examples, including the NERC progress, so thank you very much for commenting on that. The other two key elements I wanted to mention in terms of that engagement with industry, one is the simple engagement. For example, we have folks up on stage right now that we've been very close to in conversations with responsiveness to, for example, a very specific item is senior design projects within engineering, which is multi and interdisciplinary. It's not just about students in nuclear engineering, which we're en route there with a fundamentals course, but it's going across not only engineering disciplines, but across the disciplines in the institution to be responsive, getting students exposed to the nuclear industry, the sector, and quite honestly also faculty that may not have been thinking in that direction, but certainly have expertise to bring to all the immediate and ancillary industry that impact the nuclear sector. The other piece is the Wyoming Innovation Partnership, Governor Gordon's Economic Development Initiative. That has brought together not just the university programming and the folks, but also with the community colleges, the Business Council, DWS, and Department of Education. One of the key sectors or categories within WIP is energy. It has been from the get-go, and in phase 2 of WIP, a specific emphasis was on nuclear. And folks that didn't know that before, I've talked to a few of you last night about it. I think it's during the break or afterward, please grab me by the ear or however to say, I want to know more about how we get involved in that nuclear segment of WIP, because we are very, very intent on expanding that particular endeavor, and that comes in the form of projects in conjunction with industry. And with our community college partners. I have one sitting right beside me from Western. So I just want to make sure we emphasize that that which some people don't know. WIP, one of the key foci rather, is nuclear. So let's visit more, and I will also be up later on to answer some questions. Thank you.
So we are closing to the end here, but we have someone just pick the microphone. I cannot deny the voice. Please, Senator Dockstader, go ahead.
A lot of talk of micros. Dan Dockstader, Senate District 16, Lincoln Teton. A lot of talk about these micros, kicking it out at 2025. Been talking price point, something we can kind of wrap our heads around for industry, for residential. These lights in this room are 5.6 cents a kilowatt hour. How close are we?
That's a great question. So hydro is really cheap, right? And so identifying the industry and the need that is more specific to a microreactor price point is the number one focus for everything we're doing in commercial. So we'll be able to answer that question in more detail, but we know energy security has price beyond how many cents per kilowatt hour. And we know that depending on where you are in the country or in the world, that price can vary rapidly. And so the price increases that are happening throughout this state, and you talk to people in Hawaii, you talk to people in different locations throughout the globe, it's a variety of different use cases. So we're not looking to replace on-grid power supply of cheap energy. Really, this is a very focused effort to look at where is the energy demand in the future, where is it most expensive, and where can we apply microreactor technology to make the most benefit. So a comparison to hydropower would be probably hurtful to the overall microreactor business case, but a comparison to millions and millions and millions of other use cases or end users is what we're going to focus on. And then being able to deploy and prove the technology and scale up will require a lot of feedback from the economics of different locations. So don't know the price point right now, but that's why we have to focus on it. That's why we have to undergo a full 360-degree view of what the deployment costs are going to be and what the scale-up costs are going to be. But I can tell you the overriding priority is making it as cost-effective as possible. It has to be cheap. Nuclear has to be cheaper than it currently is, or at least currently conceived, to make it a viable business case. And a viable business case will take on its own life, like we talked about private investment, and that life will be, will grow so rapidly as long as these use cases continue to emerge. And like I mentioned earlier, we see these use cases emerging with energy demands and energy prices that are far greater than 5.6 cents a kilowatt. So that's what our focus is going to be. And the foundational technology development and initial deployment in Wyoming is a crucial part of that because there's such a focus on energy in the state.
I was worried about that because if I'm going to spend 10 years of my life, helping stand this up, I don't want to get to the end of it and find out that it's not competitive, right? I have that entrepreneurial mind that says I don't want to waste 10 years, right? We'll work on something interesting. But when I look at a reactor, and everybody can look at the reactors, but not many people manufacture things, it's a pretty amazing system that is not that complicated to manufacture the parts for. Even the graphite that we talk about, that there's not a lot there. By the time you manufacture it and then you fuel it, right? The striking difference is you don't have to run fuel to that every year, right? You don't have to run fuel to it every day. You don't have to go dig the coal out and keep feeding it. You don't have to keep running the gas line to it. That makes a really interesting case. But what we're doing is we're going to get to the bottom of that. But I do know when you manufacture things, the first three, I never worry about whether I'm making money on the first three. They're going to be expensive. My people are figuring it out. You got to set this whole supply chain up. But when we start talking about hundreds, now we get very competitive. And I do think there should be 3 to 5 different reactor companies competing because that gets the price competitive and it drives customer service. When you do that, I see no reason it's not going to be competitive. It's got to scale though, and we don't want to make every one of them a science project. And we need to get all of the regulations out of the way that were put in place to kill it. Because those are driving up costs, right? Not driving safety. Or
skewing costs.
Or skewing costs, right? and we'll get there. I mean, it's magnificent if you look at the, you look at the capability of it, and I'm betting the next 10 years of my life that it's going to be very interesting, competitive. It doesn't need to be the cheapest, just needs to be competitive. And I think also, to your point, if you had electricity costs in the USA and we didn't have this problem coming, it's not that interesting for the USA. It is super interesting for the rest of the world. So, and I do think that we'll solve the USA problem because we will. We're good at it, right, once we focus on it. And this will be much more interesting for the United States to export microreactor energy to the world. And that will really set us up as an energy leader and energy security.
Yeah, and from PAC Energy's perspective, we're a technology agnostic developer. So I've run price scenarios across all the different technologies, all the different configurations, on-grid, off-grid, and I do think that we'll get to a competitive price point, but things also change. Gas prices could go up, gas prices could go down. And so that 5 cents with a future gas price at a lower price point will be cheaper than 5 cents. So it's not just about achieving that benchmark today, it's about, or achieving that benchmark into the future, it's about maintaining that competitive price point going forward. And I think we can get there.
Thank you very much. We are a few minutes over time here. I did not have time to ask my tough question, so I'm transferring the baton to Randy. He is going to be with the next panel that will need to ask maybe some tough questions, because the gap exists. And I didn't have time to put the finger in the wound, but maybe one of the hypotheses here, that field of dreams exists for 1 second. Until people figure out there's not enough parking lots. Or when you hit a home run, the ball goes in the cornfield and nobody's there to catch the ball. So that good work from executive and legislative and the private sector line exists for a very small second. And then as soon the game starts to be played, there is a need to update the framework that attract and motivate people. It's a never-ending job. And maybe the way to close that gap is via community engagement, to listen to people that we all care about it. Jennifer.
Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking Marcio and this excellent panel. And I'm happy to invite everyone for a brief break for coffee and snacks. There's coffee and tea in the back of the room. Snacks are right outside of these doors. Please come back for Rennie's panel at 10:45. Thank you. Well, thank you all for returning for what I think is going to be a really, really wonderful conversation. We heard a number of threads in the first panel about community engagement and stakeholder engagement. And I'm so delighted now to turn it over to Rennie McKay, who is the policy director at the Office of the Governor of Wyoming. And Rennie, the floor is yours to introduce your panelists or to invite them to introduce themselves. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Great. Jennifer, really glad to be here with all of you. I think that last discussion set this up very well. So I'm just going to say this. I think, Mike, you said it, that panel was a bunch of people who are forward-looking. We're all from the government, and so we're going to be about how to slow things down, make things really hard. And I'm kind of joking, and I'm kind of not. Because I think the reality of community engagement is what can happen that does slow things down. Because be it regulation, be it funding, or be it just social license, if you're going to innovate, if you're going to be forward-looking, if it's nuclear energy, if it's anything else, you've got to have that public support to move ahead. So I'm really glad to kind of pivot off of that. And you know, Marcio is clearly not American by birth. He's now an American citizen. I hide it a lot better unless you look at my poutine socks and you know I'm from Canada. So we are a really diverse group of moderators here, and I, because of that Canadian, I'm a little bit less serious all the time. So hopefully we'll have a little fun here too, and I'm really excited about this panel. Mayor Lundvall is somebody I just met. Everyone else I've known for multiple years or quite a while, and I think we've got a really great panel to look at public engagement, because we have elected officials, and we also have those folks who have had to create buy-in when they've tried to innovate or tried to diversify the economy and really look at the challenges that happen when you do that, and especially here in Wyoming, what makes us unique. And I do think Wyoming is very unique when it comes to energy. We are, I think, the energy producing state. I don't think any state has the identity of producing energy for the nation more than Wyoming does. Texas produces more energy, but it's not as big a part of their economy. It's not as big a part of their culture. We export the most raw energy, BTUs, measured across all forms of export of anyone. So it really is the reality of our state too. And I think there's the survey that the University of Wyoming School of Energy Resources and Ruckelshaus Institute of Environment and Natural Resources has done. They did a 2020 and a 2023 look at public perceptions in Wyoming about energy and nuclear energy. And in 2020, what was found is that of the energy production types, nuclear had the least amount of support. It was about 36%, and there was about 36% of unsure or neutral in 2020. When they redid that survey about 3 years later, they gotten 20% more support for nuclear. So very fascinating to see. So I think some things have changed. I think because of that identity of being an energy producing state and having excitement around TerraPower and Natrium, in those years, people started to actually understand the benefits more. But I do think that there is a lot to be done, because nuclear is still low on the list of all the energy forms of where there's support. So I think to Marcio's point, the finger in the wound is there's not full support for nuclear energy yet in Wyoming. We've got lots to do, and I think this room is the kind of the room that's responsible for doing that. And I'm excited now to turn it over to folks, and I'm going to start with Commissioner Natalie Amacker, who is from here in Teton County, and I'll let her introduce herself, because she is somebody who's really worked across Wyoming, not just in Teton County, on issues that are important to this state, but she comes from here and understands the culture here. So I think an easy thing is if you'll introduce yourself and just talk a little bit about kind of what your experiences are talking to people about energy in this community, and what you think the current state of public perceptions are.
Thank you, Rennie. I'm Natalie Amacker. I'm delighted to be here. As mentioned, I'm the Vice Chair of the Teton County Commission. I'm also the Vice President of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. And one of the things I love about Wyoming is that it's small enough that you get to have lots of different hats, for better or worse. So I'm going to share a few other of mine, just knowing who's in the room. I'm also on the Wyoming Community College Commission. That's a new role I've taken on. And then I am on the DEQ's Land Quality Advisory Board, because in Wyoming, some of our boards are required to have political party splits. And so we get to, those of us from Teton County also get to wear hats for that. And one of my favorite stories that I'll share, since we have the mayor of Gillette, who I've also just met, shortly after becoming a commissioner, I was already on this DEQ board, and I was going to Campbell County to tour some of the mines, since that's what we did in that role on that board. We review the rulemaking around that. We were doing some rulemaking around uranium. And so 2 county commissioners from Campbell County invited me over, and I went, and I'm from Teton County, and I didn't know what it meant to drive to a mine in Campbell County, and we ran out of gas on the way there. Or we're real close, and had to ask our hosts about getting gas and all the things, and they were like, we don't think we've ever met anyone from Teton County out in a mine. So I've been all the places, and then really got to, I drive around in the Teton County Prius to other parts of the state, so just try to exemplify all the stereotypes that might make us different when really we're much more the same. So you are in Teton County. I think we might be one of, we're not the energy production epicenter of Wyoming, but we're the epicenter for tourism and a booming real estate economy. So our dialogue around community engagement here and what that looks like many times places us at odds with the majority of the rest of the state. And so we come into conversations both with our citizens and representing the people that we represent, but also trying to represent the complete picture of what Wyoming's future is, which, yes, is energy, but is also other things. And then this question about what do we think people's general reaction is about nuclear and about that. And if I were to think about what the person on the street heard most recently about that, they maybe saw the movie Oppenheimer and read a headline about what happened with the nuclear reactor waste in Japan. And that could be the totality of everything they know about it, and they're gonna make decisions or form opinions based off of that. So I think this conversation we're gonna have is really exciting for how we would think about community engagement.
Thank you, Commissioner. So another elected official is Mayor Shea Lundvall from Gillette. Mayor, really glad you're here. And as you introduce yourself, you live what it means to be an all-of-the-above energy state. So you want to talk about how that's real to you, or what it means to actually make a statement like all-of-the-above energy?
Yes, so I'm really excited to be here. I appreciate Jennifer reaching out, and really Mr. Wandler and my boss, Tyler Miller, who owns Earthwork Solutions, allowing me to be here, because if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be able to do this. So very grateful for him and what he does, because my family, I was born and raised in the coal industry, and my dad had worked in there for 33 years. And so I worked in there growing up, going through school, and then worked in the methane fields to get myself through college. And so I'm a product of that environment and product of where I'm at today, and graduated college and then moved back to Gillette. So it's been an exciting part of my life and my career to now be able to sit up here amongst experts in the room and to be a part of this, because I think it's something where you get to see firsthand, being boots on the ground, to living it and breathing it, and now truly as the mayor, trying to be the best ambassador I can be for the city of Gillette and what we have to offer. And I think it's great to be able to affect policy in this kind of way, in this capacity. I'm very entrepreneurial minded. My boss has to slow me down and tell me to knock it off sometimes, but that's okay too. And so it's some things just don't make sense, right? But you just get to keep pushing and you keep working with experts. And one of the things I think a gentleman asked earlier is we had the community engagement part. We had Nuclear 101 back in Gillette. And I think that's a piece of the puzzle into this community engagement and the role that I'm trying to, I guess, wrap my arms around as an elected official and as the mayor. What does this look like going forward for Gillette, and how do we position Gillette to continue to be the cutting edge, right? The innovators. And as you get to know me and my personality, we're going to keep going and learn, and we're all going to grow through this together. There's not a one-size-fits-all kind of approach here, because we're all learning. We're all trying to establish what that looks like in this supply chain issue and all of it. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Great, thanks, Mayor. Moving down the line here, Sarah, just ask you, I've got to work with Sarah for several years, and she's from the Wyoming Business Council, so her job is economic diversification, trying to forward grow the economy of Wyoming, and has done it very well for a lot of years. And so, Sarah, anything else you'd want to talk about in terms of your introduction, and maybe if you can just build off of the conversation about what you're really asking is people to change when we're talking about diversification. What is that like as you've done that now for 6 years?
Yeah, thank you, Rennie. Sorry. Yes, I've been at the Business Council now for almost 7 years, actually, so which seems like an eternity, but actually most of my career is in energy. So I spent several years in oil and gas, and also a little bit in wind energy before that, and have been in the sort of project finance side of things as well as development. So when we're thinking about change and community engagement and how to help communities see a different future for themselves. I've really had the pleasure of kind of being on both sides of that in sort of different capacities across that. You know, when I think about and when I try to help folks get comfortable with something new, it actually starts by talking about what's staying the same. You know, early on in my career, when I first was starting out at an oil and gas company, I remember one of my mentors asking me, "What do you think your job here is?" And I was like, "Well, I think I need to find some oil, probably." And it was like, "No, we're here to make money. That's what companies do." And I think there's an analogy there where if you're asked about energy, if you're asked about what are we here to do, well, it's easy to say, we're here to diversify our economy. We're here to change things. But actually, our job is to keep our lifestyle the same. Our job is to create the things that are needed for people in Wyoming to maintain our lifestyle. That's the big problem that we're trying to solve, is our economy doesn't support that long-term sustainability of our current lifestyle. We're really trying to stay the same.
Curtis, turn it over to you now, and excited to have you here. Curtis has worked on a lot of initiatives in his career, and so he's got it often. We've talked to entrepreneurs who have to start up businesses. Curtis has to kind of take the other side of that and take the idea of an initiative and try to get it off the ground in higher ed. He's done that a lot, and this has been on education, workforce, and economic development, and now he's really focused on economic development at the university. And I think one of the great things that's happening right now is the university under Ed Seidel's leadership it's got a unique energy that they're putting towards economic diversification that I haven't ever seen before. So Curtis is kind of emblematic of that for me. And so turn it over there if you want to talk a little bit about what that has meant for you in your career that could relate to nuclear.
Thank you, Rennie. Yeah, Curtis Biggs, Executive Director of the newly formed, as Rennie's mentioning there, Industry and Strategic Partnerships Office under the Research and Economic Development Division at the University of Wyoming. And in terms of why and how I've gotten there, and I'm not sure what this says about myself and my career, but I've so very often been asked or charged, one or the other or both, to come in and whether it's create or more so fix or enhance or accelerate something that may not be where it can be. And I think that, speaking of emblematic, is emblematic of what this is doing, what our engagement with industry existing in Wyoming already, our new friends coming into the state. We have some of those folks here from industry. That is, I think, is demonstrative of that work. Not mine, I won't take credit for that, but it is a catalyst for what this office, the ISP, the Industry and Strategic Partnerships Office, is intent to do. It is designed to be the catalyst to be responsive, and I know Rennie provided some levity on how responsive we are in government. We are as fleet-footed as we can and need to be for our industry partners and for our agency stakeholders and broader agency organizations in the state. And that includes folks like you see up here on stage, the local EDO, the Economic Development offices around the state. We have some representation there as well. There are a lot of folks with multiple hats here, Tyler particularly I think of. But my office will, as we build it this year, is designed to be fully engaged with industry. And again, that is prospective Wyoming industry and current. It is to be, there's a big piece of not just economic development, Rennie, but research, the research piece of it. And I get to wear my academic hat and get pretty dorky about some of those. I mentioned the senior design projects, the pipelines for internship and programming like that, and also hiring pipelines, looking toward the future in terms of what curricular designs and customizations, mods do we have to make to be absolutely relevant and responsive to the current industry. And that's the transition into your question, Rennie, of looking at nuclear. We are doing some of that now, and it is just the tip of the iceberg. We've gotten pretty excited. I was speaking to some of my INL colleagues earlier about what we're doing in WIP, which is also another one of those initiatives. There's some change management going on there. It's thinking differently amongst our institutions of higher ed. How do we team up? How do we build programs, both academic for credit and workforce development programs that are going to be filling the jobs needed currently and in the future for not just nuclear, but all sectors beyond energy as well. That, I think, is what I've been doing in both my ISP role, the Industry and Strategic Partnerships role, and WIP, is how do we engage the industry, I'd say more promptly, which is yesterday. Like, we need to be doing that more now, but in meaningful ways, intentional ways, and speaking to change management, anticipation of what's coming is really key to change management. Being able to telegraph to, in terms of public engagement or community engagement, listening to them, being able to provide them information on, in this case, forecasting for jobs, something that most everyone in any community can relate to. What does that mean for, do we have an incumbent workforce that is going to transition within their own companies? LNH is a fine example of that. Where are we headed next? And what types of skills am I going to need amongst my current and prospective future workforce? But also the companies that aren't here yet. And whether it's Natrium or if we're talking MR projects, we can forecast, and that is rather than anticipating, knowing what the numbers are, what we're trying to do to serve the communities. That is community engagement at its finest. We don't always get the privilege of being able to have those numbers in front of us, but with this work that we're doing here, we can not only anticipate, but rather know what those forecasts, like have confident forecasts in terms of what jobs are being generated. And that's just one specific niche, but not just jobs, GDP or whatever we're doing within each of our communities, how that can serve them is part of what I do in my new role. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Curtis. Commissioner, one of the things that I'm glad that you come to this stage with is a little bit of skepticism or good questions. As an elected, you have to ask the hard questions. What does it take for you to kind of make a decision where you can support a project, support an industry? And how do you handle that in your role as commissioner?
Still figuring that out a little bit, 8 years in. But I think there's a few ideas. We have, our role as an elected official is to be individually and independently educated about whatever the thing is we're making a decision on. But we're also the venue by which we ensure the public gets to be heard and there's public input. And one of the principles around public engagement that we kind of ask ourselves is, do we want the community to react to what we're doing, or do we want them to help shape and inform? And so the level of education and how that starts kind of depends on the goals of the project. So I have learned you definitely don't want to take public comment if the thing you're taking public comment on is something you can't change. And so I'm going to give the public a false sense that they get to be part of this decision instead of just informing them with as much information as they can have, and certainly hearing what they have to say, but being clear about what my role is and what this decision is that we are or are not making. And I think that I've seen more frustration come because people thought that they were getting to weigh in on a process when, it develops this sentiment of like, well, the decision was already made, that was a waste of my time, and now I'm just angry. Or upset whether or not I agree or not. And so I think the stage at which we are at in any given project or initiative or endeavor and where it's being rooted from, the process has to build from there. So, me personally, I'm an investigator, but I'm also, for better or worse, a decision maker. So you put a decision on my desk, and if today's the day we're going to make it, I'm going to make it with the information I have today. But if enough, I guess the other question I often ask myself when we get in those scenarios is if everyone is saying the same thing and we haven't heard from anyone else, then I know that there's people that we've missed. Or if everyone looks the same or sounds the same or is from the same neighborhood, to use a county issue, then we haven't heard from the whole community. And so really making sure that we're getting information out to a broad enough spectrum that we are hearing the full range of impacts on any particular decision. And I think that goes along with finding the right partners to help educate and teach, giving yourself the time to do so, and to find who might be those funnels to audiences that aren't necessarily typically at the table, but that might wait till the very end and then be a very loud naysayer or become a very loud supporter. If you can create a really strong convert into something, that person can be turned into an educator for you out in their community.
Mayor, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I get the sense that, as the commissioner just said, somebody who's become a convert is you're excited about what is happening with nuclear in Wyoming and in Campbell County. And yet, Campbell County is the world capital of coal, and coal production, despite what you're saying about we're going to have all of the above, coal production in Wyoming is on a significant decline. And I'm sure you hear all the time that it isn't all of the above. There is a competition. How did you get us to become excited about what you're seeing with nuclear, especially with the possibility you could have gone down a different path to fight against it as a threat to coal?
Yeah, so multi-layer question. So I'm going to try to unpack this the best I can. Okay, Rennie, just give me a moment here. So first of all, I think part of it is understanding where you come from. That's the foundational premise, at least how my filter is being used. And understanding that coal and oil and gas are never going to go away. And it's always going to be a base load energy. And I think it's something that, well, at least for me, I understand that we have many different energy sources. And that's a great thing. We want to be a part of those solutions. And I think for part of what I'm working towards and trying to understand in the nuclear space is what does that all entail? What is the sales cycle? And I think a lot of times with an industry that truly maybe has been forgotten about in many cases, but now is being ramped up, is being not pushed, but really expedited into learning and growing on a rapid pace. So we're trying to drink out of a fire hose along with you in some cases, because the information that we're getting, we're trying to filter through to make sure is this right? Is this accurate? Or what else are we missing here to truly understand where do we fit into this puzzle? And I think for me, it's a lot of understanding where can we go, because I say this to a lot of folks. I'm laser focused on 4 years, and it doesn't make sense to a lot of people because they're like, well, you're a politician. Yeah, well, we got to get stuff done now. And that's also contrary to popular politician belief. But if we don't do what we're elected to do now, we're never going to look back and say, hey, look at how far we've come. And I think part of what my strategy and my, thankfully we got a good team member back here, Administrator Cole, to be a part of the solution process to help implement some of these high-level strategies and high-level thinking so that on a day-to-day basis we can work with our council to understand, because we rotate. And what I think what we need to do is provide a roadmap to, and I think it behooves us as the current mayor and the current council in looking back and say, okay, those that come behind us, look, where were they headed? And that's something that, quite frankly, I didn't inherit that. So I'm having to create and develop all of this as we go along. So I think I unpacked some of that, but I don't know if I answered all of it. So.
Yeah, at the heart of it is are you saying that you've come to embrace it, the opportunity, because you don't see it as a threat? Was there anything that?
Yeah, thank you. So the threat part of it, I guess, because it's such a big animal and I'm still trying to wrap my arms around it. And thankfully we have experts that can help educate me to understand the pros and cons. What are those threats? Because inevitably, as electeds, we're going to get asked those questions. And we are not going to change everybody's mind, but that's okay. And I think that my overall objective is to position Gillette to be as successful as we possibly can in the short term and in the long term.
Thanks. Sarah, thinking about just a next step, right, is that as the mayor said, you've been at this 8 months, right, and the commissioner's been at it 8 years. Everybody's kind of at their
as the mayor
stages, yeah. City council for
7
years, right? So not your first rodeo.
No.
But Sarah, as you're an implementer, what do you think are kind of some next steps that are in the short term for the industry to engage the public or certain audiences?
Sorry. Yeah, you know, I think the place to start is, well, Mike, I think, said it really well in terms of finding the tribe. I agree with Natalia that it's important to get a broad base of input, and it's especially important on a technical level when you're looking at federal grants and things like that. They require that sort of thing, so it's important to do that. But the way in which you do that is really, really important too, and it's not by talking to everybody all at once today. It's actually by finding the people who you can go far with and go maybe a little bit faster than if you took everybody with you. And part of that, I think, is, you know, I think a lot of you in here are entrepreneurs and think entrepreneurially, and so you know that the first thing that you need to think about is, who am I serving? Who's my customer? What do they need? What do they care about? And communities are just like that. They're no different from how you treat your customers or your investors. Just need to really understand, who are these people? What do they care about? And then I think the part when you're looking at your tribe, when you say, okay, you know, these people kind of care about the things that I care about, it's really important to understand what you care about first. I've seen different folks come to different communities and just try to kind of tell people what they think they want to hear. That doesn't work. It might work for a day, or it might work for a couple years even, but it doesn't work in the long term, especially in Wyoming. And that's one of the ways that I think we're somewhat unique. People have touched on how small we are, but we are very, very connected. And so when you get that tribe and you start sort of sharing those values, you start empowering that group of people, they probably know darn near everybody else in the state. And so what you're communicating to them better be something that you're gonna just communicate naturally throughout all of your interactions in the state, because saying one thing and doing another is just not going to work. But I think first steps are finding the right people to start that conversation with, and even, you know, maybe step 0.0 is really defining, who am I? What do I care about? What does my company care about? What does our industry care about? Who are we as a group?
Curtis, you've done this. It feels like to me, part of it at the programmatic level is about change management within an organization. But public engagement is kind of change management outside of the organization. Anything that you kind of take away as the hallmarks of that work?
Sure. So as I mentioned, one of the key principles of change management is anticipating where things are moving, where things are heading. And I feel, again, that we have that in place in terms of what we're anticipating, but we have enough of a nucleus here, a buildup amongst folks for energy in terms of what we're doing and the numbers that we'll take in terms of not just infrastructure, but I keep going back to the human capital piece because that's what resonates with a lot of communities. So, but again, anticipating, and in my case, I want to be very informed in that anticipation and being able to forecast that with the communities. So that'd be step one, and actually step one, and we keep hearing it up here today and everybody understands, listening, and then building relationships. And that listening is what's going to foster that on the front end. So that is as authentic as it gets for myself in that office. So that's what we bring to the table. And the transparency piece, we are in government. and we have to be able to show and forecast what it is we're doing in ways that the communities can understand. That is what change management takes from, oh yeah, this is a cliche, I'm from the government, I'm here to help you. How do we make that actually come to fruition in ways? It's because it's through relationships. And so that's number one, again, is anticipating, and in this case, informed anticipation, where we're headed. In the energy sector specifically, these are the types of forums where that is generated. The next piece is activating or acting on that network, those relationships you've built and the information you have. And that is what the ISP office is doing in terms of connecting with, whether it's in each individual case when businesses come in, energy industry specifically, what is it that their wants and needs are? And it's not always about philanthropy, which is a big piece of what the foundation and the university does. But it's about what can they do to sponsor research? What can they do to generate a pipeline or, again, customize a curriculum, which in turn will generate units of labor, wonderful graduates that can come and contribute immediately, not just from the university, but again from our community colleges and other training providers in our state. But if we don't show those types of things in terms of, okay, we can sit and listen, we can build relationships, and not just create a forum for people to speak up, even though the decisions have already made, as our commissioner noted earlier, but actually taking that feedback and doing something with it. And I think a really nice demonstration of that, example of that, is what WEA did in this case. It was referenced earlier today. They built a number of forums, including surveys, but not limited to, ways for people to provide that feedback up front. And Sarah, it's bold to note that, hey, not everybody may be on this initial ride, like you talked about. That is that acceleration or the responsiveness that we often lack in government. So I appreciated you saying that. But that is another piece of it. Is consensus something that's absolutely going to come about? No. But we have to make the best decisions. That, again, informed anticipation is really important in this case. And lastly, when it comes to the networking, making the connections, and this is an absolute plug, shameless. If this is going to be about community engagement, we have to utilize the players, the organizations, the entities, the networks that are already in place. The community colleges, along with the university, so our institutions of higher ed in the state, and another one, and this is the one where it's certainly UW, the extension, our ag extension. We are present in every county in the state and on the reservation, the Wind River Reservation. Utilize that. Let's use that as a tool for the network. And I can also give a plug to WIP, because that is what WIP is doing economic development-wise, particularly in energy. And as I said, nuclear is one of our major foci. So what do we do to utilize WIP, which is the community colleges and the university, along with other stakeholders, and the university extension, ag extension, and I'm an Aggie by heart and roots, so I got to plug in the ag piece. But utilize those systems that are already in place for change management. They have buy-in from the communities. They have people, the people working in those organizations live in those places, and they understand the people there, the businesses there, the struggles of those industries. That's where it needs to, that's where you get the buy-in, and not from just showing up or putting something on a website. It's about what you're doing with each community, and we have people in place in those. And we've only begun, but that is really critical. But utilize the networks of people that have created trust that are already in place.
Thanks. As I look at the results of the survey that the University of Wyoming did, a couple things pop out at me. One is there's an enormous drop in support for wind energy in those 3 years. So some lessons probably to be learned. And another thing that comes out of that is that there is really a desire for more information and more dialogue in Wyoming for Wyoming people about the changes in energy. They want to know what are the trade-offs that are coming for them. So I think we've got a great panel here. We've got a lot more folks who understand the industry out there. So please jump in now anytime. But I guess I'm just going to throw this back out to the panel. As we move ahead, one of the things I've always had to keep an eye on is how little data matters and how emotion overrides that, 5 to 1. So anyone want to, if you've got any cautionary tales or thoughts as with this big demand for information, also I think there's a big gap still for support that's possible for nuclear. So what can we do to get there, knowing that data is probably not going to get us there?
I can take an initial stab at that because, yeah, I've had some lessons learned for sure. I'm a very technical person. I'm a geologist. I'm an economist. So when I showed up in Wyoming trying to work on economic development, I was like, well, obviously, you know, you can see the data, and so, like, let's get to work. Didn't work. Big surprise. And that's because truth is not facts. Truth is 99% context around those facts. It doesn't mean that the facts don't matter, though. And so what I've learned in this journey is that, you need to, just like what we keep saying, you need to really understand who you're talking about and what they care about, and then translate the facts into that language. And so that's not going to happen in a big town hall. That's not going to happen in a first-time meeting. It's really important to get that relationship building work done before you can communicate the facts that are important to communicate. And it's really important to get those facts right. I think it's easy for that context to sort of seep into the decision making, and emotion drives all of our decisions because we're human beings. But I believe it's sort of incumbent on us as folks in the executive branch and for policymakers to really understand what is the industry looking for, what are the things that are really, really needed, and to do that in a way that is fast and responsive, but not hasty. And so I think the listening just goes, you need to listen, you need to listen, you need to listen, and then make sure that your communication is based on emotions and considering those emotions, and that the actions that we take are based on data and the most reliable data that we have possible.
Rennie, I might add to that for just a second, because I think a lot of times in the government, there is this perception that you're untouchable. And in reality, we're just like you. And, you know, we may not always agree, but I think a lot of times the gap in communication in this community engagement part of it is remembering as an elected official that our constituents and the general public are our customers. And in a private sector, you still have to be responsive to your customers. In sales, you still have to be responsive to emails. You still have to, you're no different, at least that's how I have chosen to go down this path for me as the mayor. And so I think it's caused some great dialogue amongst the citizens in Gillette, because just last night, I had a call from a constituent that was just for whatever reason, just wouldn't get off this bone of what was happening in Gillette. And so when you talk to them and realizing like, hey, okay, you can interface with people, you know, it's okay. And it talked him off the ledge, and we went our separate ways, and it was a very positive, you know, conversation. So I think more so than anything, I have chosen to take the path of the education process first, and because I think so many times the general public think that you are trying to push something on them, and that's not it at all. We're just trying to learn along with you, and we just have to be responsive.
Rennie, I would just add that we have to be very nimble in terms of, like you said, I don't find it to be one or other. I think there's a sweet spot that continues to move depending on the audience when it comes to the feeling, the emotion, or how people are, what people see from their end, which is reality, but also the data. And I find that whether it's in a meeting amongst peers at the institution, or it's in that town hall that does have its place, or if it's in a meeting like this, I feel like you have to understand with whom you're working, and if you don't have that relationship, it's not a dead end. In fact, very often I'll go to the data in that case because that is the initial connection I have. But understanding the other folks, if it's about bottom line, depending on the audience or the conversation, but they need to understand, and they're very paramount to the bottom line is the why, whether it's an up, whether we're on our way up, or if there's a decline in terms of revenues or whatnot. So I think for me, it's been, we have to be fleet-footed, depending on the audience we're working with and the information we have, and lastly, the relationship that we have with whatever the group is. So it's not a black and white situation for me. It's very live. Yep.
I'll add something that is maybe a little bit different direction, but I totally agree with lots of what I have heard here. And I think sometimes as an elected official, it's easy to call the people that you know are going to tell you the thing you want to hear. And they're going to reinforce that you're on the right path, and they're maybe your echo chamber, or just your go-to people, and that sometimes we have to be willing to get in the room with the people that are going to ask us the hard questions, and that are going to hold us accountable. I try, and I use this analogy. I'm a parent, I have 3 kids. One of the parenting books I read that taught me something really revolutionary that now comes to play in many parts of my life is that when my small child is upset and I need to talk to him, is to get on the same level as him and look at him in the eyes and not be up here talking down to him down there. And that idea of kind of getting in the shoes and getting in the same perspective as the person who is I'm trying to connect with or trying to understand, or who I'm at odds with at that particular moment, so that I can educate them, knowing that we're probably not going to leave the conversation high-fiving totally in agreement, but that we will have both felt heard, and that I had the chance to share what I had to share and what I had learned. They had the chance to be heard. And I think that level of attention and willingness to have some of the harder conversations, even though it might mean that we have to change our course a little bit or slow down, in the long run can result in better buy-in, and have had success with people that are like, I don't agree with any of your policies, but I know that you heard me and that you took what I had to say into consideration, and maybe I did learn something and changed it in a little bit of a way, and that makes, in the long run, I think, a sense of community and a sense of like, oh, we actually engaged. And there was a back and forth and a dialogue.
I think that, as we were hearing, the role of the public sector as we move forward is priming the pump, and that's going to take dollars. So as the legislature meets in February this year in Wyoming, will there be support in place to have more dollars available to either fund the University of Wyoming and its role, or energy matching funds? So there's a great measurable moment for us in the next 6 months. So anybody who wants to be engaged in that, I think that there's a great start for us. And from what I'm hearing here too is the more we need to listen, so I think seeking out some of the people that do have doubts right now or opposition are going to be important for us. So really do want to open it up to the floor here and find out if anybody kind of has some insights into some areas where they think we really need to focus our public engagement going forward. Because I think we all see opportunity. I was really heartened to hear what the market seems to be signaling to all of you, because that's wonderful on that front. And if the market can support this, it means the investment that the state of Wyoming is making with real dollars is also going down the right path. That said, I don't know that we're there yet. We've got more to do in terms of enhancing the program at SER. If this industry is going to grow in Wyoming, if our research is going to grow, if our workforce is going to grow. So the governor's going to ask for more dollars for the Wyoming Innovation Partnership, and we could be focusing on nuclear with one of those programs. So there's an area too to kind of focus on as we look for outcomes. So those are a couple of highlights. Again, anybody here on the floor want to chime in yet?
Rennie, this was probably the most exciting part of what we were doing today, is the input right now from the greater group. And I often say it and people scoff or laugh or both, but let me have it. Like, it's very important for us at the university to hear from folks, the partners, the naysayers. And if you're here today, we may not have to do it today. I'm pretty sensitive, just kidding. let me have it, whether it's right now or after the panel. But these are things we need to get better at what we're doing to perfect our craft. As I was chatting with our BWXT folks, where we are now has not happened overnight. It has taken months and months of time, which is pretty rapid fire for government again. And grace, patience, and also I would exuberance from our private sector folks is what has gotten us where we are now. Along with our organizations, SER has gotten referenced a few times, WEA, the COB, the College of Business and University knows something about nimbleness when it comes to responsiveness to our private sector partners. That's the kind of stuff that we need as feedback from our agency organizations as well as fellow university folks, but primarily our industry people. So yeah, let me have it.
This is Mike Wandler with LNH Industrial and Evercore Energy. The state's done a great job with what we've got teed up already in the BWXT, working with the Wyoming Innovative Entrepreneurs and finding the opportunities and finding the customers. Preliminarily, it looks like these customers are going to overwhelm us very quickly. So I'm personally doing the sales side of and I never do that. I have 25 salesmen, they all do it. This is so easy that they're going to be pulling us in. And it'll be interesting to see once we understand what we're selling and what the rough costs are, how many we can sign up. But we're going to have that feedback early, and then we'll be able to design, are we assembling these reactors? All of this, I did a gap analysis for LNH on NQA1, because if we're going to do anything that's going to be irradiated, it need to be NQA1. And I need about 10 million worth of work lined up to be able to do NQA1 because it adds cost to the company. So there's going to be some interesting things around that, finding parts to manufacture that they get into that first. But as we go through this process with BWXT, we're going to find real things that need to be solved, right? Real businesses that need to be set up. And those will come up quick. And I have no doubt that Wyoming you'll rise to the occasion, because you already have, and there'd be no reason to really stop now. And we'll try to disperse that throughout the state. I would say that to be an NQA1, automation is beautiful. So the more automated we can make these plants, so we're not talking about a bunch of old lathes and old welding machines with people pulling the triggers. This is going to be highly automated so that you can cross that NQA1 bar and have high quality and have production. So that'll be a little bit different for Wyoming, but it fits Wyoming too. So I think from a training standpoint, these are going to be engineering level of jobs. Still gearheads, still have a work ethic, but they're going to be running a plant with lots of robots, lots of robotic machines. So that'll be interesting. But I think what we have funded right now, within a year, we'll probably have a really good list of the first things to hit, and then there'll be another list behind that. And to your point, I'm looking at the customers, and from a customer standpoint, what's the demand and where are the white spaces, and then spread that across all the innovative entrepreneurs in Wyoming and anybody else that wants to play. So I don't know where all that goes, but good job so far, and I'm sure we'll be leading this a year from now and 2 years from now.
And Mike, I just want to insert a little bit of a plug right now, because I think we do have programs that will help us be responsive as those needs come up. Like to Marcio's point earlier, we'll keep seeing new needs as we keep furthering this industry. And so through about the Business Ready Community Program very well, but for those of you who don't, we have a program that we run through the Wyoming Business Council that funds community infrastructure that makes those communities ready for business development and industrial development. And sort of the beautiful thing about that, I think it was Josh who was talking about de-risking projects for companies. I think that can go a long way to de-risk these projects for communities also is going to be important to getting those communities on board. And so when we build infrastructure. It might be, as simple as water infrastructure. It might be as simple as a building or something like that. Regardless of whether that specific project is successful, the community will have that infrastructure, and they'll be able to make money on that infrastructure, and they'll be able to then develop their economy beyond just this opportunity too. So I think that's a key thing as you all are looking at projects in Wyoming. Just keep us in mind, because we can potentially help unlock some of those things that might get in your way.
And I'd also add the perception on that automation. Since we're talking community engagement here, what does that mean in terms of jobs? It means new jobs. It means evolution of others. If we are not transparent about what that looks like, we're not doing our jobs either. That does not mean loss of jobs, net loss of jobs. And I think we have to be very honest with our communities about that piece too, which is, it requires to be daring, quite honestly. And referencing the Wyoming Innovative Entrepreneurs, they're not afraid to look that in the eye. They've had those conversations, but there are folks that are not aware of WE or haven't talked to the WE group that I think we need to do a finer job to get word out on what is automation looking like, because there is a fear that jobs will go away, and they're not entirely wrong. But what does that look like in terms of the evolution of that workforce is really critical to get out there.
Rennie, I guess one thing I was just thinking of is, to your point, Curtis, is I think part of what government's role can be is a facilitator. And I think sometimes we can be, the biggest threat to government is inertia. And I think it could be for any organization at that point. But really trying to be a facilitator in the sense of whether it's whatever part of the supply chain you're in, as a government, we can always refine the processes internally to better serve our customers. Because, if you're going to come into our city, we want you to have a positive experience, right? So, and it starts with the front end staff, right? And so if we all have that like-minded attitude and like-minded that we're going to be servants and we're going to do the best we can with the information we have, and we're going to get you through the planning commission, we're going to get you through the zoning, we're going to get you through all of those necessary steps. Those are all parts of that whole big picture here of community engagement that I think oftentimes gets overlooked, and therefore doesn't give government a very good name sometimes, because it's red tape. Why do I got to do this, and all those things. And just again, the education piece of holding their hand through those processes just aid in those conversations and those relationships. And so I think the whole overall experience.
All of you, I think, are committed going forward to informing Wyoming people about nuclear industry and policy. What do you need to do it better as you go forward? What stories, what data, what other tools do you need?
I'll start. I think you just used the word stories, Rennie, and I think that's really something tangible experiences with things make it harder for people to imagine whatever they've made up in their head when they actually see whatever the thing is. I'll take my own experience when I went to Campbell County and toured the uranium mine. I don't know what I thought it was going to be like before I got there, but when I saw it for myself and saw how it all worked, it was very different than probably what a large industrial site that I had initially conceived. And when you have, I think, giving people their own experience, their chance to touch something or see it, talk to the real person, you can't underestimate what that can do to create a news story for someone as they are given data and facts, which all need to be correct, but those are just data and facts. But that real experience is really important. And then you also find out kind of what their expectations were, or you get different questions when someone can hold something or walk in the room or be in the place. I think is valuable. So I would say that's something I personally would look for in being able to share that story. Again, we're in Teton County, and most of the time, things are happening around us, and we can be excluded from the conversation because the things that make our economy tick are not always the same things making the economy tick in the rest of the state. But yet we're all here having this meeting. And so I think understanding the bigger implications of how it fits into other things that are important in Wyoming, not just the energy industry, but tourism. Our community is very concerned with preserving what makes people want to come and visit us. And so I could today write a lot of stories of assumptions that people would make about a growing nuclear industry in Wyoming and how that might be bad for us here. That would probably many be false. And so I think thinking about it outside of the energy industry is going to be really important for those bigger stories, and when those stories translate onto a more national lens, because a lot of people come through here that are a part of the rest of the country, and we see people from all over the world through here. And so how does our community fit into that story when we aren't at the top of the list of the energy producers in the state of Wyoming?
I think one thing that would be useful for us is, at the Business Council, we do business recruiting, but when it comes to a specific industry, it's difficult for us to have more than just an inch deep knowledge of an industry, and that makes it more difficult for us to develop relationships. And I think many of you in this room are already doing a lot of this lift and developing relationships throughout the nuclear energy industry. But I would just ask for you to continue to do that and to continue bringing them forward to us, because we have the programs to be responsive to those leads. But it's difficult for us to have the really substantive conversations that you all are able to have.
I think I might add, just because I was thinking of the Nuclear 101 that we had in Gillette, because I think it provided an opportunity for the general public and for those that may be opposed to it to provide that input and that feedback. And we had the experts in the room that gave us that knowledge and those facts that, quite frankly, I can't give them. And that's okay, because I don't have to know everything, but we have the experts that do, and pointing them in their direction. And if they had follow-up questions or, more concerns, they can reach out to them and they can provide that specific facts and that data. But again, I go back to the thought process of, we're the facilitators. If we can go to Nuclear 101, okay, what does Nuclear 202 look like? And let's, while we're on that whole college class thing, why don't we go to 505? By the time we get through this, everything is moving along sequentially, zigzagging through this whole channel of education that the community has their opportunity to provide their input along the way. And then no one, I guess, not no one, but very few people will then come back and say, well, you didn't tell us, right? There's many opportunities for that engagement.
Hi, Todd Allen, University of Michigan, Nuclear 101 through 105. So a two-part question. A lot of times I hear people talk about community engagement, and it's all very focused on, we're going to deploy a thing, right? We're going to get to the point where we agree we're going to deploy a thing. But in energy terms, that thing lasts for decades. So what's your suggestions about the ongoing data collection, community interaction, such that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, it's still a positive story? So that's one. And second, when I lived in Idaho, one thing that I found was very special about Western states was they were small enough that the average person could go talk to the political person. Like, it's easier, right? I mean, we've got Teton Valley and Campbell, easy to get together. Like, is the model exportable? You want to be the Saudi Arabia of energy, you're going to have to sell to more populated states. Is the community engagement models that work for you exportable?
I may take a stab at this and you jump in. Good question. I think there's something to be said about the like-mindedness of going forward with this concept. Because if we can sit up here on the same stage and have this conversation that I've never met her before, let's go forward together with like-mindedness and the commonalities of educating the general public and say, hey, you can be two different industries across the same state and solving the same problem. So I think that's the first piece of it. And I'm trying to remember the second piece that you had. I don't know if it's been done, if I'm being honest. At least I'm not aware of it.
I think it depends on your elected officials. I think the willingness to be in conversations with people that you don't agree with all the time, which is becoming increasingly hard to do, and how we as a society want, if we use lowercase letters, civic education, what we want that to be like and how we want that engagement to be. If we just want to be right and show up everywhere and be right and have an opinion to be right, then no, it's probably not exportable out of your living room, but certainly not off of your social media page. But if you are curious, and maybe I think my answer a little bit is like, if you can find the way to get people to be curious, and maybe that starts with kids, in an educational setting of developing an interest and a curiosity, and less an interest in being right and more being curious. I think long-term, staying engaged. I'll use an example of different industry because I'm more familiar with it. Here in Teton County, we've been going through with our lodging tax board and our Chamber of Commerce just a big effort of what is, it's called sustainable destination management. How do we not kill the thing that makes everyone want to come? And we can't, if we stop inviting people, they won't come and then we won't have an economy. But if we have too many people, then people have a bad experience. And so finding that happy medium. So I think it is, if the government is in the role, and I totally agree, a facilitator and convener, and can keep that in a cyclical period of evaluation and talking about it and thinking about it, and evaluating it and not walking away, and that's probably a two-way street of private sector, public sector staying engaged about what's happening, and having those relationships, because elected officials will come and go. Over time, those relationships have to be maintained, and how those processes and being honest about what it is that you're doing, and what the impacts were. No one used to come here in the winter. A lot of effort was, now people are here in the winter, and now everybody wants everyone to go away. So, we got what we wanted, which is a year-round economy, but it came with costs. And so now we're evaluating that and what we want to do about that and what's next. So I think that developing systems and infrastructure and institutionalizing it in a positive way, the evaluation input feedback loop over time is maybe how that looks with an industry that's going to have decades of evolution.
Yeah, I agree with that. If you implement a system, which we are kind of getting to the point where we have some pretty decent systems, then it becomes definitely exportable. But I think where the limit is to that are, maybe where Wyoming is sort of uniquely suited for this particular opportunity, is our value set. We have a pretty different value set than a lot of other states who are our neighbors and things like that. So we are market driven, we're independent, we are energy minded, and just working with other states, one in particular to our south, they are energy minded, but they're not necessarily quite as market driven. They are more, they're less willing to get out of the way than we are, I think. And so I think there are components of what we've got going on here that are exportable, but we're special. We're just better than everybody else.
I think it's a very fascinating question, and I guess what I would kind of urge this room to do going forward is keep an eye on trends, because I agree completely with Sarah that this is a very special place. I think the opportunity here probably is more developed than anywhere else. But I want to keep an eye on that. And, elected officials do come and go. I think a lot of people in this room are sticky within at least the industry and supportive of the industry. And as elected officials change, keep an eye on what trends exist. I think somebody said earlier that Wyoming isn't very sticky. And the data shows that. I think we have one of the fewest number of residents who were born in this state, of any state in the country. So we're changing a lot, and our demographics keep changing more and more every year. So I want to know if that changes. If that would be what I will do as long as I'm in my role and doing this. But you probably will all outlive me because I'm just there as long as the governor is. So that has a finite amount of time. So I think you make a really good point, and we should keep an eye on the trends of support or concern around certain questions for the industry going forward, because if you see things change, that means something is going on in this state, and it's probably some signals that either the public engagement isn't working or that Wyoming has changed. And I see that happening in our future.
So Steve Allmeyer with Idaho National Lab. Just a side comment first, Commissioner. So unintended consequences. So I grew up visiting Jackson all the time. So that was over 50 years ago. Driving in, passing 4 miles of bumper-to-bumper cars on the road, unintended consequences. So thinking about that, thinking about community engagement, thinking about what's gone on the past year in that regard with nuclear topics, nuclear applications in particular. It's not really about the reactors, about what you do with them, right? So Mayor, you hosted the Nuclear 101, that was great, and Mike. Lots of different community presentations over the course of the year, engagement with the legislature, education sessions, information sessions. Even in Jackson, I think the lab was invited, Idaho National Lab was invited to come over and do information sessions. So I see a lot of really positive, good stuff, hopefully impactful engagement with communities past year. But thinking about that, and then thinking about especially the BWXT project that's being funded with the governor's fund going forward, it makes me wonder, and I want to ask you all the question, should somebody or some entity own a more formal engagement plan for this industry going forward, so you can get to an end state, not in a kind of a random fashion, but a thoughtful, deliberate way? And if so, who or what? Is it the Energy Authority? Is it the governor's office? Give us your thought.
I think it's a great question, and I think it's maybe kind of an area as we wrap up too we can talk about, because Jennifer, I really appreciate that the Atlantic Council's here hosting this, having this conversation. Public engagement wasn't on the agenda last year. It may not be on next year's agenda because it isn't always at the forefront of people's thinking. And so keep it there, because again, if we lose track of this, if nobody's organizing it, I don't know where this could go on us in a hurry. So if we're really going to make progress, you've got to have social license to do it, and so then I'll let the answer come of who should host this.
So just a note on that, Rennie. If somebody doesn't own it, somebody might do something to you with it, right? So somebody will own it for you.
Well, I'll easily answer that I know Teton County is not going to own it, but I think that's exactly right. And when we think about public engagement at a big picture level, you have to have a goal, and that the goal today is not going to be the same as the goal 10 years from now when we have different information, and how we did on it, and checking how we did and what happened from it. And so I think that is a great question to ask, because it is kind of a global, and the audiences are slightly different for what you want to do. And so I'm curious to find out who's going to take that action step as their takeaway from this panel. But that, for anything that we would do around public engagement, having an endpoint or having kind of the next stage of it to know if we did what we want to do, because public engagement is not holding a town hall and a forum and an open house and then we're done and we checked the community engagement box.
I think, I think this needs to be a collaborative question that we all work on together, because we at the Business Council aren't going to have the list of check boxes to do and then you are done, just like Natalia said. And but one thing that we could potentially do, collaboratively, is provide tools that make it easier to figure out where are the doors, what are the entry points, who do I talk to, what, who can guide me through this step, what, who are the people with the authority, that sort of thing. So from my perspective, I think every time you create like the plan, it is relevant for about 2 minutes. But if we can, again, just create sort of a system, a process that can be flexible and acknowledge what community you're talking about, what they care about, and the specific project, I think that sounds like something that we at the Business Council would love to lead, but obviously not. I don't like to own anything, not because I don't like to do stuff, but because it's not very effective for us to do that. It really needs to be owned by the people who are actually engaging in that process.
I would note that speaking to making sure it's living and comprehensive, because it is ever changing. There's a lot of evolution happening all the time. But in my experience, most recently in the industry, in energy, WEA is doing that largely in a way that feels, okay, but they are not the end all. They are not omnipotent. They are info gathering, whether it's community or the industry folks. The education community has been engaged. And I've got some WEA colleagues here, so please shake your head or cut me off. But that has been my experience, that they are doing that in a way that brings all the stakeholders, including WBC, leading in the ways that they should. The communities, including the mayors and commissioners in their communities, our legislators certainly they're not just stakeholders, they are making things happen for us. The WEA is aware of all those players. If we can go to a website and click those boxes we were talking about, checking the boxes, that actually can be a monumental experience. It's something we could look into tangibly in terms of answering that question. Having a list of, a point of contact, which in this theoretical situation, WEA, but it identifies all the players, DWS and their workforce training programs, and how that can work for some audiences, not all. But why is not all? Let's figure out why. Because it has not worked for everybody, depending on the size of their community or size of their particular industry. The next would be, say, the WE, as we talked about, the Wyoming Innovative Entrepreneurs, another resource. So in short, I think WEA has been that catalyst you're talking about, the leader. And I don't know, could you rattle off in a fragment sentence the mission of the WEA?
Said it this morning, advocate, facilitate, and advance the energy economy. But to that point, I think, to Sarah's point, is it on? Okay. For those who didn't hear, it's advocate, facilitate, and advance the energy economy. And to Sarah's point, is anybody having a hard time hearing me? Okay. We are that hub, to Curtis's point, but we don't have to be the owner, right? I think this is such a small state, like we've heard today, that we can all collaborate. And I think a very good example of how we're doing that, we've talked a lot about this BWXT project, that's going through the energy matching funds. That was appropriated to the governor's office. Governor's office is, having been there for 4 years, I know at capacity, that's a big fund to manage. So they said, okay, who of our state entities is best to do this? The governor delegated that then to the WEA. So as the WEA leading that, how do we make sure we're having everyone's voice there? So our review committee is not only myself, but we have School of Energy Resources, the governor's office, the Business Council, and Workforce Services to make sure this is a collective effort and we're all moving forward with the same voice. So I think, selfishly, I think Curtis is right. I think we're the hub for that, for energy. But who says that, going forward, the manufacturing takes off and those sort of things, that's probably not our bailiwick, right? They would probably look to the Business Council or look to workforce entities to grow that as well. So it's a collective effort, but we all see ourselves as energy's front door for Wyoming.
Thank you. Thanks to the panel. really appreciate you, everybody getting here, and I really appreciate all of you in the room, because what this comes down to is public engagement is all of us. If that's your job, your full-time job is public engagement, you need partners and you need good storytellers, you need good data, all of that, and you all can bring that to the table. So as this evolves and we get a strategy and we get someone working to execute it, I think you're all going to be part of it. Hopefully this helped you all think about that a little bit more too. And I look forward to kind of measuring our progress in the years to come. So thank you all for being here, and thanks for having us, Atlantic Council.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking the panelists. And now I'm delighted to introduce and to welcome to the podium someone who I think in this room and in this state truly needs no introduction at all. The Honorable Donald Burkhart Jr., who represents the District 15 in the Wyoming House of Representatives. Representative Burkhart, please come to the podium. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jennifer. So, again, a thank you to our panelists. Great discussion. Sorry more people aren't here to hear this. You know, I want to address something that the last panel said, and it's up to all of us, with community engagement. We need to remember we're always talking to the community. And one facetious comment made in jest can destroy a whole discussion. Years ago, we looked at storing spent nuclear fuel in Wyoming, and the first interview that showed up in the paper, they asked the chairman of that select committee, what do you think? And his comment was, this will bring all the wackos out of the woodwork. Where do you think that went from there? It went downhill quickly. So just for all of you, when we talk to people, they are interested. They need to really understand the concepts, the benefits, sometimes the downside. So with that, and Dr. Jean and I are before lunch, and I'm not hungry, so I'll just go on forever. There aren't any snacks out there, so you're out of luck. I want to thank all of you for being here. Thank the Atlantic Council for hosting this, and it's wonderful to be back here a year ago. A year ago when I was here, I said I'd like to be back in a year, tell you what we've done. You know, and I sat there and thought about this when Jennifer asked me to come back, and thought, man, I don't know what we've done. Until I sat down and put things to paper. And in a year, the progress we've made is tremendous. A number of you have heard me say, I just hate the speed of government. Not effective, not fast enough. Please get out of the way and let people really do what they need to do. So, but when you remember that 3 years ago, there was no nuclear anything in Wyoming. None of us had that on the radar. We had a meeting, let's see, Sarah was there, Glenn Morrell at the time was there, and some other people on where do we need to go with the economy of Wyoming to make recommendations to the governor. We talked about nuclear and decided we don't, at the time, don't have the money to do this. The state wasn't as economically sound as it is now. We'll concentrate on other things. In 3 years, the big concentration is now nuclear for the state. When you look at what's going on and 4 other pillars of our economy that have been kind of set for the future, nuclear is really at the forefront. I think we may need to have some meetings like this to discuss some of those other issues, such as carbon capture, sequestration, or critical materials. But nuclear has taken the forefront. It's a big thing. The easiest way to put it. So go into a few things and celebrate those advances that we've made to take advantage of these massive opportunities that nuclear energy gives us. The governor's office has provided tremendous leadership in this, along with WEA and Wyoming Energy Authority and the School of Energy Resources. And by the way, I was told because of other things, no one from SER is here today. Part of it is, I think all Wyoming people have this in their back of the minds, we need to keep all the orthopedic doctors in the state employed. It's an active lifestyle. Orthopedic doctors are really important. One is having surgery on their hip. The other thing is the Western Governors Association wanted some time with people, and SER took the point on that. So, and we do place a lot of trust in WA, a lot of accountability, and they've done a lot in the last year. One example being they organized Wyoming's response to the DOE RFI on HALU production. Great response of what the state is willing and can do. SER has been a shining example in the last year, and you heard it earlier. 3 years ago, they got $2 million from the legislature to push nuclear. And what they have done with $2 million, I think is fantastic. 600,000 of that went to laboratory upgrades. 400,000 went to competitive research grants at the school, so there's half of it. The rest went to capacity building and to some other efforts they've made. One of the efforts, again with this last panel, the outreach they've done with communities and the social economic impacts of nuclear energy. You know, the technology is relatively easy. It's kind of settled in that. But how do you win somebody's mind and heart to go forward with this and say, yeah, I'd like to have a nuclear power plant in my community. Me, I want one, by the way. I want one in my garage. If I can figure out a way to make it about this big and the size of a little Honda generator, yeah, I want one. So if you come up with one, call me first. So, but SER right now, I think Steve made the comment, they've got almost $4 million in grants. From going from 0 to 4 million in a matter of a year or two is tremendous. Some of those grants have gone to this social aspect of nuclear power. But they've got, for example, an $800,000 grant on environmental justice approach to advanced nuclear siting. They've got a $350,000 grant from Battelle, the Rocky Mountain Foundation, and the legislature has kicked in some money too, $300,000, to look at producing nuclear grade graphite in Wyoming. They're already doing some work on coal and that sort of thing, and this falls right in place with that. The demand for graphite, if you look at some of the projections, is going to be tremendous. Another opportunity for the state. This past year we had Lab Day. All 17 national labs came to Laramie, Wyoming to talk about what they do and what Wyoming can offer in the way of research, education, cooperative agreements. And I think a telling feature of that is when they came in to do the preliminary, some of the labs came in and said, well, we want to look over the venue, talk to UW. They ended up hiring 3 students. So there's the quality of Wyoming's engineering majors, and that you know, they weren't even putting applications in, but the companies liked them and said, want a job? Because there's the demand right now, tremendous demand for any educated person. So along with Lab Day, SER held the Renew Conference, which is research explorations for nuclear energy in Wyoming. And during that conference, DOE, I'll round it off, I don't like the thing, it's $1 less than $600,000. Why this odd number, I don't know. It gave them a grant to the Nuclear Energy Research Center for nuclear energy initiatives in the form of faculty scholarships. They also received another grant of $800,000+ for study of nuclear chemistry. Again, going from nothing in a year to those kind of grants, and that, which is tremendous. Previous question, and Steve kind of answered it. I gave him a hard time about you took 10 minutes of my talk away. UW is now offering a fundamentals of nuclear engineering course. They had nothing last year, and that my count is 23 enrolled students. Steve's a little higher. SER, the other thing too is SER isn't all engineering, science. They employ economists, lawyers, business people in the School of Business, because without all those other things, you don't get to succeed in any industry. If you don't take care of the money, you don't have a business. You know, most businesses that fail, they don't fail because the people didn't have a good product, well, sometimes they do, or couldn't market it. They fail because they can't handle the money. They can't handle the legal aspects. So SER employs a lot of those people too. In fact, they're my go-to. If I need economic information, they're my go-to group because I know it's going to be factual. It might not be what I want, but it's factual, which is a good thing. I deal with facts a lot better than guesses. So, the state's also had ongoing meetings with DOE and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. We've been to Washington, they've been to Wyoming. We've had some excellent discussions in that. One thing, Wyoming is pursuing increased agreement state status on radionuclide byproducts. That's a start. Well, it doesn't have a direct application to any reactors. It's a start of working with the NRC on other things that I think Wyoming is going to do in the future. So I think all of you know that the president of TerraPower, Bill Gates, was here in the spring to do a dedication of the Natrium reactor, and that didn't work out because 2 days before DOE said, by the way, we were wrong. You do have to have NEPA analysis, and you need 9 of them. So they actually had to bring dirt in, dump it with a truck, and Bill got to a shovel full of made-up dirt so he could do something at that. So sometimes we don't win all of them. You know, we're working with DOE to get some of those issues taken care of. And that. Kind of the other big event is the announcement that all of you are aware of between Wyoming and BWXT, and I think Mike is gonna participate in that in a big way. That is actually big on a national scale. One of the first things that I heard about when that came out was from someone in Washington saying, "You're really doing this?" Yep, we are. And as where's Rob? Rob said, we have $150 million still sitting there that we're kind of, that's my carrot. We're kind of holding it to see what people come up with for new ideas. We aren't just throwing it out there. We want to see what people have to offer and what they feel that would benefit them and the state. $10.2 million, not a big portion of that, not even 10% of that amount of money, but a major impact, I think, for the future of Wyoming. We continue this past year to engage with others, American Nuclear Society, Nuclear Energy Institute. Believe it or not, the Sarah Week and the oil gas people are very interested in nuclear power for their refineries and in some of their fields where they have nothing but small little solar panels to run their equipment. And we've been to workshops. Nuclear was a major portion of WA's Energy Summit earlier in the year. So, and we continue to engage across state lines and nationally on that. So without the luxury of time to just think about things, and we don't have that luxury, frankly. We really don't. It's time to act, and I've said this before, not theory, not academic discussions, but true actions for those commitments that will provide us with firm, affordable, resilient, available power. And I'm glad that the comments made earlier, I'm glad people look at Wyoming as the center for advanced nuclear. And we'll stay there, whatever it takes, we'll move forward. As people said, you know, I like coal. I worked in a coal mine. University of Wyoming used to be heated with coal and that, but people aren't buying it. If you manufacture vehicles and you only manufacture green ones and everybody says, I want yellow ones, frankly, you're going to give them yellow ones. You want to sell your product. Now, coal will still be here, but I think nuclear power will take a much bigger portion of the load in the future. There are a number of companies. We talk about BWXT, and I can't tell you who because they've asked me not to, but we have other companies talking to Wyoming also about their goals for nuclear power here and what they have planned. Interesting thing is when you talk to companies who say, well, I want to come in and build a power plant. Okay, what research have you done? Well, no, I just want to come and build it. Come on, you've got to do a lot of legwork and prep work, which some companies aren't right now. So we're working with them quietly. I don't want to say under the radar because we have nothing to hide, but we aren't bragging about it either, and maybe that's to the detriment of Wyoming. So, like I said, the big announcement is BWXT's money. Wyoming itself has the appetite to invest in these industries. We've shown that. A number of us have talked that probably we need to look at larger projects and frankly bigger amounts of money on a three-way investment of federal, state, and private money. And I think we can work well with matching funds. I think we've shown with other things that we can make that money grow in the future with those matching funds. The momentum we have, and that was mentioned earlier, I think will continue. I think that we will build on that. You know, I hear about these other states. They want to study nuclear power. The legislature wants to do something. They pass bills and then the governor vetoes them, or the legislature won't take them up. I think you'll see the opposite here in Wyoming. We are willing to run that legislation if need be, but I don't think we need much. I've looked at it a couple times, and I think we've opened the gates and set the framework for nuclear power in Wyoming without a lot of issues. I think the next one is taxes and our tax structure and how it affects the industry, but how it affects all industries, not just nuclear. So if you fix one, you ought to fix them all. And I talked to Mike earlier about some concepts we have. Nobody likes new taxes. Sometimes you do need them, but other ways you can work around them and provide industry with, again, a framework they can live with. So with that, I'll leave you with the one thought that unlike other states, I think Wyoming we have I call it a sense of urgency around developing nuclear. We aren't going to wait till next year. We aren't going to run legislation that says we're going to fund a little study. It's easier to just do it. We'll probably make a few mistakes. Companies make mistakes, but you got to get things, if you get more things right than you get wrong, you succeed. And I think Wyoming will do that. I think we've set ourselves up for success. We just need to continue with it. And I think the comment was made, if you build it, they will come. I think that's really true. Joe, where are you? You made that. Yeah. I think that's really true. However, we don't want to sit here and say, well, we built it, now we're going to wait for them to come. You know, if you look at a stadium, you build it, and then pretty soon you expand it, and you get bigger and bigger. And I think that's the way Wyoming will go in that. So I'll leave you with that. Wyoming still has a few ideas we're going to pursue in the coming year. If we can make them work, I think you'll see it becomes much easier to do business in Wyoming and that. And I guess, Jennifer, are questions appropriate if somebody has a question, or am I just supposed to talk and leave?
Any questions?
Any questions? Okay, good, thanks.
Thank you so much, Representative Burkhart. And now I'm delighted to invite Dr. Jess Jean, who is the Associate Laboratory Director for Nuclear Science and Technology at the Idaho National Laboratory.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. So thank you very much. It's great to be here in this meeting. On behalf of INL, which has been working with the Atlantic Council, doing a great job, I'm very pleased that you attended this meeting. You're here to have these discussions. it's incredibly impressive leadership in this state in nuclear energy. This is really, for my whole career, what I was hoping to see, and so I'm glad to see state step forward. One of the accomplishments I'd say that Representative Burkhart didn't mention is while he did talk about the national visibility, he and Mauricio were recognized by the American Nuclear Society with a special award for state leadership, and it was clear that Don, you, and Mauricio stood out in leadership among the states and actually doing things, and was recognized in Indianapolis with that award. So congratulations to you both, very well deserved. I know you're humble and didn't include that on your list, but I thought to be complete, we needed to get that out there. Idaho National Laboratory, I think you're all familiar with it. It's just 2 hours from here. Nuclear Energy Lab. Nearly co-located with you all, just across the mountains. By the way, we have pictures of Tetons all over our lab, by the way, Commissioner. And so we feel that we're the regional laboratory, and the fact that we're able to support everything here in Wyoming is outstanding. So great place. Commissioner, you mentioned the Tetons being tourists. A great place to have meetings. We love coming over here to meetings. It's a beautiful venue for the meeting. We had our first meeting last year, very successful, so it's a good follow-on to that meeting. Rob, grateful for comments that you made. Is Rob in the room? Okay, there he is in the back. So thank you very much, and you're taking over a big role with your new job. As far as some of the comments, I just want to amplify some of what I've heard. We want to, in the Frontiers Project, catalyze partnerships, and you can see that's happening state, national laboratory, private, with several private folks on the first panel. Some of the things I've heard were about demand signal, about business models, about deployment, and those are, while as a national laboratory we do research and development, develop technologies. Many of those technologies are in the BWXT reactor, but it does take all these other things for reactors to actually get deployed. And so that panel covered many of those things. The model, Mike, that I made comments to you that you're pursuing is just outstanding. I think you're really a first mover in that. So I'm very happy to hear your comments on the panel as well. The second panel related to community engagement was also outstanding. It just emphasizes the strong leadership. I particularly resonates with me when you talk about data and facts, Mayor and Commissioner, about getting that information out. That's something we are really happy to do. So if there's anybody who would like to see more of that from INL, we're happy to engage there. We're happy to play that role, interstate collaboration, facilitate partnerships on advanced energy, nuclear energy in particular, applications of nuclear energy. Look ahead for the report, Don, next year on if you can top this year on achievements, that would be outstanding. There was a question, I can't remember, Steve, it was you or that asked about replicating this model. We are engaging with other states. Alaska, there's a meeting coming up 2 weeks, in Alaska to see where they are. I was there a few weeks ago. Strong interest in Alaska for all the same reasons, many similar reasons, I guess I should say, in Wyoming. And then also Utah. Utah is also a strong energy state. And so we're looking for engagements in Utah as well as we work through our region. There is something special about the West and wanting to get things done. And I think we can see this happen across many of these like-minded states. So with that, I'll close here. Jennifer has some comments, and then I think we'll be on to lunch. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jess. So that concludes the substantive portion of today's programming. And I just want to thank everyone. I know that we don't have a completely packed room today, but I think every single person is bringing their knowledge, their expertise, and has really contributed to this conversation. So I especially want to thank our partners at the Idaho National Laboratory, at the Wyoming Business Council, the Wyoming Energy Authority, and at the University of Wyoming School of Energy Resources. And I also want to thank the Cloud Veil for hosting us once again. And finally, my favorite part of my job, I get to invite everyone to join us for lunch on the rooftop. But please bring all of your belongings with you because this room is now no longer ours. So thank you all again, and I hope to see you next year.
Thank you.